I see Carrie's ready. All right. I'm calling this meeting of the Boston City Council's Ways and Means Committee to order. For the record, my name is Kenzie Bach. I'm the District 8 City Councilor and the Chair of the Ways and Means Committee. This public hearing is being recorded and live streamed at boston.gov/city-council-tv. It will be rebroadcast on Comcast Channel 8, RCN Channel 82, and Verizon Channel 1964. The Council's budget review process has encompassed about 27 hearings over roughly 6 weeks. This is actually our final of the departmental hearings that we hold in the initial budget review process. And we strongly encourage residents to take a moment to engage in the process by giving testimony for the record. So there's a few ways to do that. The one I really want to highlight is that tonight at 6 p.m. we'll be having a dedicated public testimony hearing that will be focused on any topic and related to the city budget, any department. So if you come at 6 p.m., there's a Zoom link online. You can give your testimony on the budget. And I know that I and all my colleagues would really appreciate that. You can also attend this hearing. There's a Zoom link attached to the public notice. Wait till the end and I'll recognize you for public testimony. You can go to boston.gov/council-FY21Budget and read about our process and submit written testimony or submit a video of yourself, or email the committee at ccc.wm@boston.gov. Or you can informally tweet us your questions using the hashtag BOSBudget, BOS budget. So there's lots of ways to get in touch. You know, we've been going through a fairly thorough review process. As we turn into June, obviously the city has to consider questions about the revenue picture, which is very uncertain right now, and think about how we reach a final budget for the year ahead. But this whole process has been really helpful, and we've been grateful to the many departments for coming and answering our questions. Today's hearing is on docket 0588 to 0590, orders for the FY21 operating budget, including annual appropriations for departmental operations for the school department and for other post-employment benefits. Docket 0591 to 0592, orders for capital fund transfer appropriations. And docket 0593 to 0596, orders for the capital budget, including loan orders and lease purchase agreements. Those collectively, those dockets make up the full FY21 proposed budget from the mayor. The focus area today will actually be the Boston Planning and Development Agency. The BPDA actually has its own budget, as we'll be discussing, funded through some other sources. However, its capital budget is also involved in some of those capital loan orders that I mentioned. And obviously the council takes an interest in the important work that it does in relation to the city. So we're joined today by Lauren Shurtleff, Devin Quick, Jonathan Greeley, all from the BPDA, and Trin Nguyen, the director of the Office of Workforce Development. The Office of Workforce Development is also under the BPDA EDIC umbrella. And we're also joined by Michelle Goldberg, the budget director for the BPDA, who will be presenting. I want to note my colleagues who have joined us so far. We've got a few more on their way, but joined here today by Councillor Liz Braden from District 9, Councillor Ed Flynn from District 2, Councillor Michael Flaherty at large, Councillor Anissa Sabi-George at large, Councillor Frank Baker, District 3, Councillor Julia Mejia at large, and Councillor Kim Janey, District 7, and Council President. So without further ado, I want to hand it over to Michelle Goldberg.
Thank you so much. Let's see if I can get my screen presenting here. So it'll be a picture for my intro. Good afternoon, Madam Chair Bach, Vice Chair Asabi George, and members of the council. My name is Michelle Goldberg, and I am the Budget Director of the Boston Planning and Development Agency. Thank you for giving us the opportunity to speak with you about our work. As you stated before, I'm joined by Trin Nguyen, Director of the Mayor's Office of Workforce Development, which falls under the BPDA, Lauren Shurtleff, Interim Director of Planning, Devin Quirk, Director of Real Estate, and Jonathan Greeley, Director of Development Review. I hope my colleagues and I can have a rich conversation with you all today about the BPDA's budget and financial activities. Although we cannot yet discuss FY21 until our public meeting with the Board of Directors on June 11, we can discuss FY20, and our third quarter update was provided in advance of this hearing, and I welcome your comments on that report. A little about me before we start. I have been with the BPDA since 2016, helping the efforts in advancing towards financial excellence by focusing on building out a high-functioning budget and financial administration unit within the agency's finance department. I also have a passion for equitable procurement and represent the BPDA in the Living Cities Inclusive Procurement Accelerator, along with the Mayor's Office of Economic Development, or OED. BPDA staff and I collaborated with the city to help the mayor release his executive order for equitable procurement, and we look forward to the results of the disparity study. My hope is to take you all through a brief outline of our financial framework before we open for questions. The last slide is for our department budgets, and this is where I will attempt to respond to some of the questions that emerged in the working session with the council on May 18. Any remaining items we are happy to discuss today or provide responses in writing. I also highly encourage folks to spend some time with our budget book. This document hopefully looks a lot like what OBM releases, as they are where I received my training. While this was my first time providing an opening statement to this body, I have attended many city council hearings. I started my city service as a management analyst in the Mayor's Office of Budget Management, so I hope to make Jim and Jack proud. Hey guys. As a self-sustaining organization, the BPDA is made up of 5 business units that interact through what is referred to as related party transactions. The units are comprised of 3 major entities: the Boston Redevelopment Authority, or BRA, the Economic Development Industrial Corporation, EDIC, which does include the Mayor's Office of Workforce Development, OWD, and the Boston Industrial Development Finance Authority, or BIDFA. There are also 2 minor entities which are associated with 501c3 nonprofits, the Boston Local Development Corporation and Friends of Youth Boston Opportunity, or FYOB. So just to quickly walk folks through our traditional sources and uses, the BPDA operating revenue is derived from 2 main categories: rental leases and parking, and grants and donations, which comprises 86%. The remaining is sale of real estate, equity participation, and interest on other income. Majority of our revenue that supports our operations comes from rental leases, parking, and payments in lieu of taxes for OWD. Let's see here, sorry, lost my slides. On the expenditure side, personnel and benefits represents the largest category of expenses for the BPDA with 47% of the total budget. It's important to note that staff costs related to operating OWD's community-based organizations are accounted for in contractual services rather than personnel. Here we go, sorry about that. The next largest category is contractual services. Sorry, I lost my place here. Property management and debt and administrative expenses comprise for the remaining 23%. We are starting to see more expenses in this category related to construction as government accounting standard boards, or GASB rules, are changing. I'm happy to get into that more later if folks like. This is why property management saw such a large increase from FY19 to FY20 because of the inclusion of the culvert sinkhole project and the demolition and environmental remediation of the Building 108 in the Charlestown Navy Yard, both of which are large construction projects that need to be funded through our operating budget instead of our capital budget. The BPDA also participates in funding streams that does not support our operations. Here are some of the items that are not included in the BPDA's operating and capital budget. The BPDA acts as a pass-through entity for mitigation and community benefit funds that arise from Article 80 process as memorialized in the cooperation agreements. The BPDA monitors compliance with the cooperation agreements and collects and releases funds per those agreements' terms. Funds held under these agreements are restricted and cannot be used for BPDA operating expenses. The BPDA holds notes or loans on many properties throughout the city for land conveyed for development purposes. These notes are generally only due when there is a change in the use of the property from what it was originally intended for. For example, when a property changes from affordable to market rate housing, the note may become due. Nearly all notes receivable funds are due to the City of Boston, not the BPDA. So if repayment were to be received, the BPDA would collect the funds and transfer them to the city's Department of Neighborhood Development. Revenue generated from inclusionary development policy, or IDP, for affordable housing through the Article 80 process is also transferred to be managed to D&D for the creation of housing at sites across the city. Federal or state grants will often pass through the BPDA to other recipients. An example of such an occurrence is the state's MassWorks grants. The BPDA administers the program for these grants, but does not receive any administrative fees. These grants are excluded from the budget as the BPDA does not directly benefit from them, and they would artificially increase the size of our budget. Linkage. Funds collected for and distributed through linkage, such as neighborhood job trusts, are not included in this budget. I know there were a couple of questions that came up about this during the working session, and we'd be happy to speak about that. These funds are directed to the City of Boston. From there, some funds may ultimately be distributed in the form of a grant to fund specific OWD job training programs at the city's discretion. So the next slide I have here for folks is just our department budget slide. This pie chart splits our expenses by department rather than category. We did exclude some of our minor departments like the Board of Directors and BIDFA for the purposes of this chart. The planning department is comprised of 54 budgeted positions and their associated benefits. The staff focuses on everything from climate and resiliency planning to historic preservation. The staff engages in internal planning as well as partnering with outside entities for large-scale projects. I would like to highlight that the planning department has a team of 4 community engagement managers who focus on building relationships and reaching out to new voices in the community where we have active planning work underway. We have held planning events in libraries, cafes, bowling alleys, breweries, all to have informal discussions about planning with the overall goal of breaking down barriers to participation by meeting people where they are. We are sometimes able to leverage outside funds for planning and are grateful for the city's ongoing partnership with funding for transportation planning studies through the past capital budgets. The BPDA also partners with other city entities like parks and transportation to ensure strategic results for Bostonians. This department has grown in staff over the past 5 years, which is reflective of the BPDA's effort to strike the balance between internal staff and outside expertise. Councillor Bach asked about some historic preservation work. Our urban design team has that at the forefront of their work, and we're more than happy to have that conversation. The planning budget also includes $50,000 for advertising and $10,000 for public meeting expenses. The real estate department is the engine that makes the motor run for the BPDA. To manage our portfolio of assets, it requires a team of real estate professionals, public construction experts, and a small staff of union employees. When it comes to procurement, the real estate department has worked closely with finance on both procedural clarifications and engaging in more outreach and sourcing. Diversity and inclusion is a priority in all aspects of our real estate work, ranging from efforts to contract with more MWBEs in our operations and construction contracts to new strategies to advance inclusion and inclusion in disposition and redevelopment on BRA-owned property. And while the agency is reliant on our revenue from our real estate department to fund our budget, we also take every opportunity to use our real estate assets to advance community development goals. Devin Quirk is with us today and will be able to respond to your questions about how our ground leases work, what we are seeing in the early months of COVID-19, as well as topics around land disposition. For development review, their budget is almost entirely staffed with 16 employees. Jonathan Greeley is with us today and will be able to answer questions on topics such as how we are working with large institutions in the city, IDP unit negotiations, and how COVID-19 might be impacting development going forward. Councillor Braden mentioned in the working session the idea of developing a cheat sheet. The development review team has been working over the last few years to find new ways to report on development over a long period of time, and we'd love to speak more about this. Similarly, similar to the planning department, the development review department has $65,000 to budget for advertising for public meetings and $10,000 for meeting expenses such as bottled water, security, space rental, childcare, and other materials. I would like to note that it is also a BPDA practice to advertise in various local media often paying for advertisements to be translated into neighborhood appropriate languages. Although small, we have some mighty administrative departments as well. Our records and legal teams have worked hard to make sure that land disposition agreements associated with urban renewal parcels are easy to access and available to the public on our website. Our MIS team supports the agency and the city in a variety of ways. Oh yeah, and OWD. People sometimes forget that they are basically a quarter of our agency. There is so much amazing work going on there. I can't attempt to do it justice, so I'm pleased to have Trin with us to help talk about all the impactful work going on in OWD. Although I didn't prepare a slide, our budget book has tons of information on our capital budget. The BPDA took another step forward addressing our infrastructure needs by establishing the Capital Reserve Fund as a mechanism to set aside funding for critical projects outlined in our 10-year capital improvement plan. This will ensure that any positive financial performance that we see goes directly to supporting our capital needs. Currently, that fund has $25 million authorized for reserve. We are grateful for the $2.4 million included in the FY20 city capital budget for the resiliency projects in the Raymond L. Flynn Marine Park and planning projects. Those projects are currently out to bid, and I'm happy to discuss those. Nevertheless, our comprehensive capital needs assessment is providing the roadmap for prioritizing projects. Currently, we estimate our full 10-year capital needs to be nearly $200 million. So proactively managing our capital assets is critical to the long-term financial success of the agency. As we look ahead, the agency is having serious conversations right now about how we resume public engagement successfully using a digital platform that is accessible and inclusive for all. The agency has convened an interagency work group that is developing recommendations and seeking the necessary expertise and training to determine an appropriate platform for the entire city to use. Although we are not sure what the future holds, we know there are good days on the horizon. The Boston Planning and Development Agency Board recently unanimously voted to elect Priscilla Rojas as board chair. Priscilla will be the first woman and Latina to hold the position. With this leadership, we will continue to keep access and opportunity at the center of our work. With that, I will conclude my opening statement, and we can all answer any questions that you might have. Thank you all.
Great. Thank you so much, Michelle. Great. So we'll, as has been our practice, we'll jump right into questions, and I'll defer mine to the end. So I'll put the order in the chat and let councillors know. The only thing I'll just say for BPDA folks reference is that we do this and I give people 5 minutes. When they've had 5 minutes, I hold up my gavel, and there's a 2-minute grace period. And then if you run through the 2-minute grace period, you'll hear a chime. And I would just ask, if you hear the chime, it might come when you're talking, and if not when the councilor's talking. And so feel free to like finish your sentence, finish your thought, but then just wrap up so that we can move on. We just have, I know, a lot of questions, and we try to keep it moving through so that everyone gets a chance to ask. So yeah, so with that, we'll go first off to looks like Councillor Braden, and then it'll be Councillor Flynn, and then Councillor Flaherty, and I'll put the order in the chat. Councillor Braden.
Thank you everyone. Thank you, Michelle, for your presentation. I know the linkage funds aren't included in the budget. Is it possible to get a better understanding of the funds that come in from linkage and how they're dispersed to the different buckets that linkage money can go to?
Sure. Just a moment here. Just my notes on linkage. So, regarding linkage, funds are collected and distributed through linkage. The housing linkage is generated upon issuance to the certificate of occupancy 24 months after construction starts, and it's paid in 7 equal annual installments. While the BPDA approves projects that generates linkage, the the treasurer collects those payments. we have an awful lot of detail on this, and we could probably provide you some of our written information on that if you'd like.
That would be really helpful. You know, I'm out here in Alston Brighton, and in the period of time between 95 and 2015, we had 18 million square feet of development that had linkage funds generated from it, and it just seems like a huge amount of money, and we've no idea where it goes. It's just more of a transparency issue. So I'd really appreciate as much information as we could get on that, just to help enlighten me and many of my neighbours who wonder about these things. Thank you.
Councillor,
that's all my question.
Councillor Breeden, I just want to reiterate what Michelle was saying. So linkage, we partner with the Department of Neighbourhood Development in terms of the housing linkage, and then we partner with the Trend Shop on the jobs linkage. I think to Michelle's larger point, it's a ton of detail, and I think it's a completely reasonable question for you to ask, like, hey, how does this work? Where does it go? What are the outcomes? We're happy to sit down with you at any point in time and talk big picture, talk specific project, or talk opportunities. And one of the things we often say, and I've said this to a number of the councillors in this virtual hearing today at previous times, is that one of the best things we can do to kind of work to activate linkage in and around the neighborhood or a specific project is to kind of work collectively and collaboratively to develop opportunities to spend that money. So I think that to me, it seems like a really great opportunity for this agency and other partner agencies to work with you on developing those opportunities, and also developing an understanding for your community that you present on how that money works and is used.
Yeah, that would be very valuable, Jonathan. I think shedding some light will enlighten a lot of folks and help people understand the process and where the money, what money comes in and what the money gets spent on. It's really helpful to I think it's a trust issue. I think the more we know, the better folks have a better understanding, and it will build trust in the neighbourhood with regard to these things. Thank you. That's all I have for now, Councillor Bach.
Great, thank you so much, Councillor Breeden. And I'll note that we've also been joined by Councillor Wu and Councillor O'Malley. Councillor Flynn is up next, and then it'll be Councillor Flaherty, and then Councillor Asavi-George. Councillor Flynn.
Thank you, Councillor Bach, and thank you to Michelle for your presentation. Just wanted to follow up on your presentation as the BPDA goes forward with community meetings, development projects relating to COVID-19. Can you talk about what you're thinking about, or Jonathan or whoever, what you're thinking about in terms of community engagement? You know, do we have the right equipment and technology to reach residents? Do we have the right equipment and technology so our seniors and persons with disabilities, language challenges, are also able to participate in these neighborhood meetings? And some of the logistic challenges you might have, do we need more funding to address some of that technology that may not be there? I just wanted to make sure our residents also are fully engaged and aware of what's coming up as it relates to post-COVID-19.
Councillor, that's a great question. And I would say that it is very much in process, and it's a learning process, right? I think we have all, I think collectively the city is shifting slowly from a pure response to what's the way forward. We have an internal working group that it initially started as just BPDA staff thinking about how do we do just what you identified in your question. It has now grown to include a number of other partner agencies, be it ONS, D&D, et cetera, because I think collectively as a city, we realize there's a burden to find a way to get this right. And even opportunities like this to sit down, we're all used to sitting down around tables in hearing rooms, talking face to face. Working hard to figure that out is what the next phase looks like is important. So I think we are very much determined to make sure that however we move forward, we do it with care, with deliberate intent, and a desire to be as inclusive as possible, recognizing that there remains digital divides in the city, and so balancing virtual engagement and working to show people and tell people how to do those things, with also are there opportunities for analog engagement as well. So I think it's the kind of thing that we anticipate having lots of dialogue with every one of the people on this call going forward. And I think we want to make sure that every single Bostonian has the ability to participate in government and participate in the future of their neighborhoods.
Thank you, Jonathan. As it relates to workforce development, that's a group that does tremendous work in the city. Thank you, Trin. I'm just thinking of the companies that are moving into Boston. Are we looking at those companies and seeing what type of jobs they are, what type of training they have, and are we able to partner up with some of our high schools or young people, making sure that they have the skills and training so that they can get those good jobs, many of them in the waterfront. So what type of partnerships are you thinking about or working on?
Thank you, Councillor Flynn. I mean, that's a really good question, and thank you for always being engaged in workforce development. It's so important. You know, as the Office of Workforce Development, we do really focus on low-income, marginalized residents and communities and bring them into the fold of mainstream career pathways, as you know. It has been dominated by those who have a bachelor's degree, which is half of the residents of the city. And so we have been aggressively working with the Office of Economic Development, Chief John Barros's office, and also with the planning departments to make sure that employers who are coming in to the city and are tenants to these anchor buildings and developments, that we have a conversation of what kinds of jobs will be available and if Boston residents could be trained for those jobs. Then after those conversations, then we are linked to their HR directors to see when the hires are and timeline and competencies in which they need. And then the third step, which is to work with community partners, which we have published on our website, all the training partners that are nonprofits and community colleges that are providing credentials and graduates, and then link them to the job openings of those HR directors, online portals. And within our training, we not only provide credential training, associate degrees that are free of charge. We also provide supplies, tuition and fees, and whatever it takes to get Boston residents in front of that line. That's going to be tough post-COVID and during COVID-19, mainly because there are huge job losses. But we are putting our pulse on that to see what jobs are coming back and what jobs are not, and where Boston residents can fill in that competitive edge gap. And so it'd be interesting, and your question is right on the mark, and I really appreciate it. A lot of our publications, RFPs, and scope of work for all the partners that we have are online, including our Neighborhoods Jobs Trust, which we publish annually in our annual report that's also on our website. I'm happy to answer additional questions thereafter or offline. Thank you for your question, Councillor Flynn.
Yeah, thank you, Trin. I know my time is up, and I'll ask you some more questions offline. But again, thank you for your leadership, Trin. Thank you, Councillor Block.
Thank you so much, Councillor Flynn. I'll note we've also been joined by Councillor Lydia Edwards. Next, we're going to Councillor Flaherty, and then it'll be Councillor Asabi George, and then Councillor Mejia. Councillor Flaherty.
Sure. Good afternoon, Madam Chair. A quick question. Well, a couple of things. Let me first comment as the member that's probably had dealt with the BRA doing business as the BPDA the longest, but while not perfect, communication and outreach arguably has never been better from my vantage point. I know that a lot of my colleagues probably can't even envision what it's like, but this administration has been great, and they've been focusing on more of the community outreach. And so I know that one piece on the language access, I know that you guys are working on that. So I'd like to hear a little bit about the improvements on the language access and the community outreach on that front. I also I see Trin, I to follow up maybe a little more on Council Flynn. You have the Academy program, and I'd like to learn a little bit about some of the statistics around that and how that program's going, and what our COVID response has done in that regard. To Devin, want to just check in to make sure that you've been touching base with all of your tenants and particularly your subtenants, just to see what, if anything, they need and how COVID has impacted them. I know we had a hearing recently where we talked about the tenants, and there was some concern that we may not have had a good vantage point on or outreach to the subtenants. So want to see what, if any, advancements were made in that regard. And overall, just the overall property, our assets, and what we're doing to make sure that we're protecting all of our assets during this time.
Thank you, Councillor. I can start, and I can hand over to my colleagues to answer the language access question. I can start with the property questions and the COVID questions related to our real estate. So thank you again, and thank you for the comment about outreach as well. I think that's something that our team here takes very seriously, and we're trying to get better at it every day. So I appreciate the words of support. As it relates to COVID-19 and our real estate portfolio, our tenants are certainly very affected. We spoke about that in a hearing a couple weeks ago, and I thank the councillors for their attention to the issue. And your questions about subtenants were very well founded, something that we've been speaking to our direct tenants significantly about, and largely because of your advocacy on the issue. We have two properties that have a large amount of subtenants. That's the Design and Innovation Building in the Marine Park, and we have Faneuil Hall Quincy Market. Those two properties, we've spoken to the landlords are the direct tenants. They're in very different lease situations with us. In speaking with Jamestown, who's the primary owner of the lease at the Design and Innovation Building, they've been doing a lot of tenant outreach. They have a $50 million assistance fund for retail-oriented businesses that are impacted by COVID-19. They're spending a lot of that capital at the Design and Innovation Building. There's only so much outreach we can do to our direct tenants, to our subtenants, because we need to outreach to our direct tenants, and we can't interfere with our direct tenants' business interests. But if you are aware, or any councillor is aware of a subtenant at one of our properties who has COVID-19 issues that you feel like, or you're getting the message that they're not getting appropriate attention from their landlord, we're happy to have a conversation. There's just only so much we can do formally because of our lease arrangements. So that's happy to follow up with you more offline, but it's a question we're certainly taking seriously. And maybe I'll hand it over to John and Lauren to answer the language access question.
So, can everybody hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. It's a little weird because on this format, you don't necessarily see yourself. So regarding language access, as you know, Councillor, we're committed to achieving the City of Boston's 2016 communications ordinance to ensure meaningful access in terms of BPDA processes for individuals with limited English proficiency. BPDA staff have been taking reasonable steps to provide people with limited English proficiency with timely, meaningful opportunities to be informed of and participate in both development review and planning processes. We always, provide at least a sentence or two, sometimes on flyers. Often we translate the entire advertisement, depending on the language. But nevertheless, this is something that we're actually very aware of that we need to improve. And, we're actually working right now on developing a language access plan. So we hope to see these efforts expand in the near future. And we're happy to keep discussing what that might look like with you and your colleagues.
Very good. And then obviously, Jonathan, we've talked a little bit about some folks wearing multiple hats, and particularly on the food distribution side. So again, another shout out. I know Mike Christopher has done a lot of work, and he's been great to deal with sort of on the community side. You guys are, I don't know if you can give me a breakdown, but you guys are dealing with so many different projects, and sort of don't have them all off the top of my head, but I think the last time I checked, you have sort of like about a dozen full full-scale planning initiatives. You got probably 20 smaller scale initiatives. You've got about probably 15 or so in the planning process that we have to join with city and other city and state departments. So my question is, we're also experiencing unprecedented development boom. Hopefully, when we kind of move forward through our COVID response, we can get our legs underneath us again. But wanted to know with respect to staffing levels, to support the level of planning, unprecedented amounts of planning going on. And I know because the citywide city council, there's meetings going on, many different neighborhoods, multiple meetings a night. So being able to maintain and manage that flow with the existing number of FTEs, is that sufficient, and or what plans do you have to beef up on the planning side?
So from an agency-wide staffing perspective, we've been partnering very closely with our human resources team, and we're excited to have a talent acquisition manager on the team. As we built out our practices around financial controls, working towards making that distinction between FTE and positions has been a space where we've spent a lot of time. And so you'll start to see our budget reports come out that we're trying to indicate where our vacancies are. And we tend to budget those at about a half year because of our kind of just general attrition. I think we've also noticed in a very tight market, it's been hard to attract the right candidate with the right skill sets at the right time. And so I think that's why, we've thought about that a lot. And we've also tried to embed diversity in what we do. In the past few years, we have done an awful lot of hiring in the planning department. We're also trying to keep up with retirement attrition. A couple of years ago, when we sat down and looked at our data, we had almost 100 years of institutional knowledge that was going to be retiring out in the next 5 to 6 years. So, we are trying to think about succession planning quite a bit. And I think that we do recognize that who knows what the world might look like. And we need a lot of really smart people on deck. And so, I don't know, Lauren and Jonathan, if you want to speak about your department specifically?
I would just add that we've been fortunate to really grow the planning department over the course of the last several years. We've also created some more management structure within the planning department so that we can keep track of what everybody's doing and also be, more efficient. From time to time, we still, need outside help on kind of specialty expertise planning items, which, we often will contract a consultant team to help us with. But, it kind of it depends on, what we're facing. Obviously, our main goal is to implement Imagine Boston. And we still have a lot of work to do. But again, like I said, we're fortunate that we've really grown pretty substantially, but we probably still do have some growth ahead, depending on the economic climate, of course.
Very good. I see the wand. So I appreciate everyone's time. I know that we don't always get along. It's the tough job you guys do. I can assure you from my vantage point, it's the best communication that this council has had with the BRA doing business as the BPDA. And I think the renewal piece and the notices go a long way in fostering that relationship. So that said, I thank you, Madam Chair, and to the men and women of the BRA doing business as the BPDA for the work that you do. It's tough stuff, but someone needs to do it, and we appreciate it.
Thank you, Councillor
Thank
Flaherty.
you, Councillor.
Next up is Councillor Sabi George, and then it'll be Councillor Mejia, and then Councillor Janey. Councillor Sabi George.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to everyone who's here on this in this meeting this afternoon. A particular thank you for the just sort of continuing the work, and I think what's been difficult circumstances, to say the least, and John and the rest of the team that's been involved in the food piece as someone who spends a lot of time working and talking about education, making sure that our kids have access to food has been a big deal, and you all have really stepped up to the plate. So I appreciate that, and thank you for the continued efforts. I hope we don't have to do it too much longer, but I think we're in it at least for the next few months. I have, over the last couple of years, I've done some work around the artist housing issue and the live workspace and the workspace. So we've got live space, workspace, and live workspace. Councillor Braden had held a virtual meeting a week and a half ago or so on this issue, plus some in her district, and just citywide. I'd love to hear an update on the efforts to create more of this space, to protect more of this space, and to make sure that when we're building this type of space, again, whether it's live work or live work space, that it's affordable and also appropriate for our artists, because we can't just sort of plug them in, and it can't just be like any other unit. Depending on the medium and the craft, it has to be specialized. So I'm curious as to an update on that piece, if you could share it. Thank you.
Councillor, thank you very much. And it seems like you've got some art going on behind you as well. We spend a lot of...
We call this a mess.
I would call it a work unit, a live work unit. It depends on where you are. It's a great question, and I think we take great pride in our collaboration with the Mayor's Office of Arts and Culture on this issue. Cara and her team are fantastic to deal with and are frequent guests on the 9th floor. I also think that this is an important issue just because we know we want to activate our neighborhoods and have complete neighborhoods. So at the moment, there are over 200 artist units that are either in projects that are under review, fully approved, or under construction. And we're always looking for opportunities to expand that. We'd be happy to have a fuller conversation with you or your team or anybody else on the council that is interested in a deeper conversation, but we want to loop in arts and culture on that as well, because I think they are tracking not just artists live work, but also work. And then there's lots of other spaces that kind of sit on the edge of that as well. So it's an important issue, and we're happy to work with you on it.
Yeah, but I think through the building of our city dome, we're discussing any of our developments that come before the BPDA to have a focus around creating this space, an affordable space, is really important. And I certainly appreciate through some of my other work on the council around more affordable housing, especially for formerly homeless. But the artist community in particular, if we want to be able to continue to have those discussions within the arts and culture element, we need to make sure that we have the space in which that art is created and artists can live and work on their craft. So appreciate the opportunity to continue that conversation. We can do that on offline and another time in partnership with Councilor Braden as well. I am curious, in another way, when we talk about public notification, I think this is one of the places where the council intersects most directly with the work of the BPDA, is that community engagement piece and the notification of community members when a large project is being onboarded or starting that conversation. So I'm curious if someone could just share sort of the official notification process and the guidelines that the BPDA follows, and how we could how the relationship is shared between BPDA and ONS, and the responsibility of sort of the division of responsibility between those two entities. And that will be it for me this round. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Councillor, I'm happy to take this one again. When it comes to large projects, or any project for that matter, we take great pride in our efforts to notify as many people as possible through as many channels as possible. That being said, I think that we recognize that there are some people that don't always hear through all the variety of channels we engage in. So to you or anybody else that has suggestions in this matter, we'd love to hear from you. Also, this was referenced in Michelle's opening remarks, the project cheat sheet. I think that'd be something that's we can kind of pull forward as a really good idea. Most large project review filings actually have a version of that. So, but I think we can tweak that and kind of make it a requirement. So we look forward to doing that going forward. What we do anytime a large project is filed, without getting into too much detail, there's a letter of intent is sent to the BPDA that is distributed widely. That then starts the formal process of engaging not just ONS, but all of you, all local elected officials on that project to engage in a dialogue about an impact advisory group. We also, in that process, strongly encourage any proponent or any new owner of a piece of property really to engage their direct abutters and their neighborhood associations in and around a project. One of the things I like to say is that it's really important to introduce yourself to your neighbors before you ask them for something. And so we work hand in glove with ONS, but also with any kind of public-facing part of City Hall, right? So that we take it very, very seriously, that the role of making sure to engage, and going forward in a world where we have more virtual engagement, not just in our own processes, but neighborhood processes, how do we find a way to balance those things? And so I would say it's very much a partnership with ONS. We have specific processes we follow related to Article 80, but ONS is a big part of helping to amplify the message we put out. Our website is, I should also just mention in closing, our website is a big piece of that as well. And so we take great strides to improve and amplify the detail on our website, and we're continuing to do so.
Great, thank you, Madam Chair. I may have another question in the next round if one of my colleagues doesn't get to it. Thank you.
Great, thanks so much, Councillor Sabi George. Next up is Councillor Mejia, and then it'll be Councillor Janey, and then Councillor Baker. Councillor Mejia.
Yes, good afternoon. I feel like it's evening by now, but thank you all for all your hard work. Looking forward to our continued partnership. I just have a few questions. For me, I keep talking about the importance of removing barriers to engagement. So just beyond translation and interpretation, I am really curious about providing, or the opportunities to provide, childcare and food at various meetings to remove barriers to engagement. Just wondering whether or not that's something that is feasible or ever being considered. Working in partnership with nonprofits and other folks who you might be able to tap, and even small restaurants in the local neighborhoods to help support them. You know, what energy, if any, exists around providing childcare and food at these sort of meetings?
Thank you, Councillor. That's a really good question. So for the last several years, we've been fortunate enough to have room in our budget to actually provide food at all of our planning meetings. And for the very most part, I would say the only instances of where it doesn't happen is if we can't find somebody locally, but for the most part, we do partner with somebody that is running a small business right near where we're holding the meeting, and within the neighborhood that the planning study is focused on. As it relates to childcare, we actually have provided that in the past, and we've offered it. I don't think anybody's actually ever availed of it. There are some challenges around how you do it, but we're completely open to it. You know, we really want to get more people to the table. Ironically, this virtual kind of format may give us the opportunity to get more people to the table because we can get them while they're at the table, you know, through the virtual format. So we look forward to utilizing this virtual technology, I would say forever, to figure out how to partner it with the analog, because there's still nothing like having a conversation person to person.
Yeah, no, thank you for that. You know, I'm also wondering, and this is just out of curiosity, you know, have you ever done an assessment as to why people aren't engaged or aren't participating actively, just to kind of, aside from just traditional barriers, what are you hearing, if anything, from folks as to why they feel so disconnected from the planning process?
So I don't know that I would say that we've done a study per se on why people haven't been engaged. I just think that, you know, if anything, in the last couple of years, we've really tried to expand the format in which we're engaging so that we're not just holding these town hall style meetings at the community center from 6 to 8 p.m. when, you know, working people are busy, everybody's busy, and there are higher priorities than attending those meetings. That's why we've been trying to have chat with the planner style events where we've gone, you know, to the park with popsicles in the summer, to bowling alleys, even to a brewery in Newmarket recently. Trying to kind of meet people where they are so that if they're doing something else, we can become part of their day. They don't have to go out of their way to be part of our effort. But I think that that will continue, especially right now. You know, staff has been thinking a lot about how can we use other digital methods? How can we use social media to get people more involved? And again, I do think that virtually, there is just something, as long as people obviously have access to the technology, which is the larger thing, which we're also working with Do It, you know, broadband equity on. But as long as people have access to it, this kind of conversation is a lot easier for most people.
Yeah, thank you. And then I just have a few questions about how we're engaging small businesses, especially minority women-owned in contracting bids. What does that process look like?
Thank you for that question. We've been looking at this issue a lot, and we've had some success working with the Office of Economic Development. Through my work with the Living Cities Inclusive Procurement Accelerator, what is clear is outreach, you know, is one of those 4 cornerstones. Clearly, certification is a very important piece, but that's kind of on the other side. For us, where we've tried to focus and where we started was with the local medias. So we run beyond what the state requires for advertisements. We're running ads in the Bay State Banner, El Mundo, and other local and ideally non-English media in order to get those bid advertisements out. We do go through on a periodic basis and try to look a little bit farther out and start to think about bundling or unbundling and what some of those opportunities are. One of the really interesting stories, at least for me, that I like to share, other folks might not think that it's so compelling, but for a long time we had bundled fencing and ornamental fencing. And so like chain link fences, if we have a parcel that we need to close off, versus like iron work. And what we found was if we unbundled that, they were different enough that we were actually able to find an MWBE in that space that could do the chain link, but not the ornamental. And so that requires looking out 12, maybe even 18 months in advance of your work to really start to think about that. When we participated in the opportunity fair with the Office of Economic Development, speaking with some of the folks there, you know, they would say, well, when do you release your big contracts? And I turned the question around and I said, when would it be advantageous for me to put this type of project out to bid? And I was able to learn that the way that they stack up their schedule, they prefer for bids to come out in the spring. So it's things like that I think getting that conversation going earlier is what we found the most success.
Thank you. And I see the gavel. I still got 2 more minutes, right? Kenzie, I just want to get one more question in. You know, I'm interested in a community-centered approach to planning and development. It always feels like the community is an afterthought, right? And so I'm really thinking about how do we build that infrastructure that drives the process through that community lens, and what opportunities exist to bring that vision to life. So, you know, as opposed to people coming into our neighborhoods with a design idea, here, react to this, is there a way to flip it where the community is able to say, here's what we'd like to do. Who are the designers that can help us make it happen? What does that look like in your world?
You know, I would say that we're always open for the community to come to us and speak with us if they have ideas, if they see needs that we haven't necessarily identified. You know, I'd also add that we've been fortunate enough to add 4 community engagement managers to our staff. And the level and dialogue has really kind of, you know, escalated because of that. And I think that, you know, most people find them a little bit, you know, more approachable. They're not necessarily trained as planners, for instance, to kind of have these discussions and start these things. But I agree that's something that, you know, we're always open to. And if we can work together to figure out what that might look like, I would welcome the opportunity.
And Councillor, I might just add into that, in addition to what Lauren said, I mean, one of the benefits of having a real estate department in the same, under the same umbrella, under the same as our planning agency, is that we're able to use our real estate to pilot some of our planning and development efforts. So when we own the land, we can really do exactly what you're saying. We can work with the community to talk about what precisely does the community want to see on a particular site. Is it affordable housing? Is it open space? And then run through that process, run a disposition process that delivers that result. It's something you can't quite do as prescriptively when it's privately owned land owned by a private entity, but we can certainly do it prescriptively when we own the real estate.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Thank you, Chairman DeBock.
Great. Thanks so much, Councillor Mejia. Next up is Council President Janey, and then it'll be Councillor Baker and then Councillor Wu. President Janey?
Thank you so much. Can you hear me okay?
Yep, can hear you great.
Yeah, wonderful. Great. So I want to thank the team. I know things have been difficult, and I think there are a lot of things that we can, as difficult as things can be, sometimes going through community processes and going through big projects, I think there are things that we can point to that we can be proud of. And I'm thinking specifically of some of the projects in my district. I have questions like I normally do in terms of the spend that this agency is spending with local businesses and businesses owned by people of color, and businesses owned by women, as well as the projects and how many of them are meeting their desired goals. I don't want to spend a lot of time in this hearing going through that. I'd rather just have that information come. And I know some of it's come from other hearings that we have had that haven't been Ways and Means hearings. But I appreciate that. I am very interested in some dollar breakdowns for District 7 and where we are with some of the projects that were underway that had to pause because of the construction and what that impact has been. I am very interested in some of the conversation that we had earlier in a conversation sponsored by my sister in service, Councillor Edwards, about how we proactively plan for equity. So I'll pause there for some response and then maybe come up with some follow-up questions. If we could talk through some of the projects in my district, namely the planned Dudley projects, and anything else in the pipeline that is impacted by the shutdown, and then the spending as well as the proactive planning.
So, Councillor, I think this could be the kind of thing that Devin and I can both tag team. I can give you a macro number, then maybe Devin can be more specifically on the planned Nubian project. So, in response to the question you put together, there's about 40 or so projects in your district, District 7, that are either under review, board approved, or under construction. That represents about $690 million of investment. And I think we're excited to see all the different things that are happening in your district. If you have a specific question about a individual project or parcel, we're happy to answer that. But then I think Devin can get more specifics on the planned Nubian. But anything beyond that scope, we're happy to get into detail.
And I don't need to get into too much of the weeds here. We can do that offline. But if there was a general sentiment around, yes, the delay for these projects in Dudley, or we think that it's cost us this amount in terms of dollars or in terms of time, et cetera, that kind of thing. More high level, I can get into the weeds offline. Thank you.
Yeah, happy to take that, Councillor Janey, and happy to follow up in detail and have a conversation offline as well. I think when it comes to the planned Nubian Square redevelopment process, which, by the way, is a great example of the type of community development work that Councillor Mejia was asking about, where over the course of 2.5, 3 years, we really brought people together across city government, all of us together, different agencies and elected officials with community members throughout the community to talk about what we really wanted to see happen on the publicly owned land in Nubian Square. There's 9 development opportunities in Nubian Square for development on public land. Some of them are very small and some of them are very large. 4 of them have already been awarded to developers. 3 of them are out for bid right now, or have bids coming back, and there's several more to go. Of the 4 that have been awarded, none are under construction yet. So I think at a high level, there are no immediate direct COVID-19 costs associated with those developments, if that's your question. I think maybe at the very highest level, the COVID-19 construction cost issues are going to be borne most immediately by developments that were in construction, in active construction when COVID-19 hit and the mayor put a pause on construction across the city. I'd say fortunately for the Nubian Square properties, there were none in that category, and time will tell what will happen, what will be the financial impact for those largely publicly funded projects going forward.
Thank you. I have a quick follow-up as we're just talking about the planned Dudley process. In my first term, was really proud of the language that we came up with in the RFP. Many of the advocates, many of the housing rights groups were very involved. It was a long process. I don't have to explain that to you guys. But there was specific language that I advocated for around equity and inclusion that was modeled after the Massport language. And we got it in there for the planned Dudley, those 4 parcels. Now, my memory is that shortly after that, there was a commitment that we were gonna do that citywide. Is that the case? Did that happen?
Yes,
that language?
absolutely.
So any project that comes a BPDA project, that RFP is going to have that 25, 25, 25 language. Oh, my apologies. I'm sorry. Let's figure this out.
I can start jumping in on that, Councillor. Great question. Thank you for raising that, and thank you for your advocacy that led to that diversity and inclusion language. The answer is absolutely, firmly yes. Both the diversity and inclusion language, which encourages minority women-owned business, small business,
displacement language,
as well as the displacement language. Both of those separate selection criteria are now in every RFP that the BPDA issues for public land, as well as any city of Boston D&D RFP for public land.
And it's the same kind of weighting with the 25, 25, 25, 25.
The weighting depends on the community process, because there are some communities that want more more detail, a greater number of selection criteria, but the default is that 25, 25. The default is 4 different selection criteria, and those 2 being weighted 25% each.
Thank you. I may have some follow-up, but I see that the gavel is up, and I'm trying to be mindful of time and before the chimes go off, in the interest of time and respect to all on the call. Thank you, Madam Chair, and if there is an opportunity for follow-up, I welcome it.
Great. Thanks so much, Councillor Janey. No, I imagine we'll have a second round of questions. Councillor Baker is up next, and then it'll be Councillor Wu and then Councillor O'Malley. Councillor Baker?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good afternoon, everybody. I first want to start out by kind of jumping on what Councillor Flaherty had to say. In my first term under a previous administration, I could not even get a return phone call from the BPDA. Now to be sitting here in this position and have gone through multiple planning processes with the BPDA, whether it's stop block, whether if it was you know, a Glover's Corner, we're getting ready to get into UMass. It's been really good to deal with you guys, Jonathan, Mike, the whole team up the planners, Michael Canizzo. You have a lot of talented people, and I think you really also care for the city. So thank you for that. I'd like to, along those lines, Jonathan, maybe this is for you. Where do you think, when we come out of this, say we come out of this August or so, where do these planning initiatives, where are they gonna, how far back have they been pushed? Do you think we've lost any step? And I'm talking about specifically my district, the UMass plan, the Glover's Corner plan, and also all that planning that you guys are doing with state agencies for Morrissey Boulevard and all those things.
Councillor, it's a really good question. So, and I think Lauren may want to chime in here after I speak for a minute or two. I think the COVID has kind of put a pause on lots of aspects of civic life for the last 10 weeks. And I think as we turn from a reactionary kind of place to a what does a new normal look like for the next year or so, we are actively trying to figure out what the impacts to some of those processes have been. One good thing is that we have all been working really, really hard on a variety of issues. So I've been in a couple meetings we've had with city and state agencies on things like Morrissey Boulevard, et cetera. We continue to engage with development proponents. For example, on the Bayside site, we have talked to them. We have a number of conversations with them. But I think one of the challenges is going to be is that community process is going to be a bit of a feeling out period, and how do we find a way to balance, I think, a collective desire from everybody in this virtual space to across the city to kind of have real and full conversations about development. And that will take a little time, and we're going to have to figure out the right way to balance the variety of objectives there. So I think we remain optimistic in the development climate of the city, and we remain optimistic about the ability to kind of collectively conduct business, often in partnership with everybody here, on what that looks like going forward. But I certainly think there have been some timing impacts because we haven't had any kind of community engagement in over in almost 3 months. Lauren, I don't know if you have anything else you want to add.
Yeah, I would. It's a good question, Councillor, just to check in and see where our staff is. They've actually remained quite busy during this, quote unquote fallow period where they're not out every other night at a community meeting. That being said, we are preparing to start having some soft engagement on planning initiatives in the next couple of weeks, actually. The next one, the first one we're going to be kicking off is a virtual chat with a planner for Mattapan next week, as well as one for Newmarket, which we're calling a community series. So a lot of this has just been, we had to be sensitive, and we still do, to what's going on outside as it relates to COVID-19. So we didn't want to, push anything on. And when I say soft engagement right now is these are just more discussions with people so that they can get back in front of us. We're not, presenting new information. We're not making decisions based on the information we're going to be having. But I do think that, in a couple months, we'll be back in, some sort of full swing, which would be a new normal. And we look forward to, seeing what that looks like. And, unfortunately, so many things have been pushed back a little bit, but we remain committed to all of the planning work that we were pursuing before this happened. If anything, with a renewed vigor, because everybody misses going out and talking to the community.
Yeah. But I think the more prepared we are, and if we have projects that are teed up and we're able to get them started, I think that will help us as a city and as a state help us along in our recovery. Can somebody talk a little bit about the I don't know what we call the apartments, but on the low scale developments, someone does over 10 units, there's 3 units here, 4 units there. I believe the BPDA tracks those units. I still hear about buildings that have been built 3 and 4 years, they still don't have people in those affordable units. Can somebody speak to that, or is that something to be handled offline?
I think, Councillor, just from my experience at D&D, I know that the affordable lotteries are handled by the Office of Fair Housing, so it's probably best to take that offline with some staff that know it better. Okay, thank you. And I didn't give Trin her plug either. Trin has been great to work with on the Jobs Trust, really thorough in her work and talk about caring about the city and the people that are in the city. The one thing that I'm trying to push Trin on is the fact that I think, and people had talked about job training earlier and what sort of programming are we doing. I think we as a city need to think larger than what we're doing or what programming we're funding. I think we should be looking at actual brick and mortar training structures. Maybe that somehow we work with Madison Park, which could convert into a kind of an adult center after school is done. I don't know what that looks like, but I think as a group, we should be thinking about brick and mortar job training. Oh, there's the gavel. That was a quick one. Okay, I'll just leave it at that. I just want to leave it with that thought. Trin, if you wanted to talk about that a little bit, maybe what the requirements are. I know we want the money that we send into a program, we want to see jobs that come out of it. Maybe you could talk about that a little bit in the possibility of a brick and mortar, if you can. You can leave it alone if you want.
For the sake of time, I'm actually going to take that offline with you and work on some of that feedback. I mean, I'd love to talk about it, but I don't think we have enough time. I do want to recognize your service and your work as a trustee of the Neighborhoods Jobs Trust, Councillor, and how you've really pushed the cores of the Neighborhoods Jobs Trust to ensure that those funds go towards the heart of what's needed. So I want to thank you for that. There's always push and pulls on where the priorities of job training is. And at the end of the day, you can train lots of people, but the bigger question is where are the jobs in which they will be placed afterwards? So we can have a longer discussion about, the kinds of jobs, which is, where they will be growing after COVID-19, and then, what kind of training can be provided with those jobs that will appear. So happy to talk to you about it, and thank you for your work and your service as a trustee of the trust.
Yeah, and just to mention the City Academy that we worked on, we went to the graduation. What a great program that is, and to my colleagues, you should look into it. One of the things that's going on, we're training people to come into parks or public works, but what's happening there, they're so valuable that they're getting hired before we're able to even get to them. So that's a success. and just people should look at it. Thank you, Trin. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks so much, Councillor Baker. Next up is Councillor Wu, and then it'll be Councillor O'Malley, and then Councillor Edwards. Councillor Wu?
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to all of our friends for your time today. Really appreciate it. I just had 3 buckets of questions. First, starting with BIDFA. So in the process of onboarding some of the new board members, there was discussion about potentially sort of renewed or expanded or redirected mission and or types of loans. What's the latest thinking on BIDFA, and if anything sort of has evolved with that agency?
I can take that, Councillor. I think amongst the staff that are here today, none of us are very close with the BIDFA organization, and we're certainly looking at if BIDFA can be a tool particularly in this economy with businesses affected by COVID-19. But we don't have a specific answer to that yet. But if there is an option, we're exploring it, and we would very much like your thinking on it. If there's any opportunities we should be exploring.
Yeah,
okay,
folks
great.
in the finance department are exploring this, and we can put you in touch with them. Thank you.
Thank you. And then secondly, on the city's relief efforts, and specifically the various relief funds that have been set up, whether it's the Resiliency Fund or on the small business or rental side, is the BPDA involved in any of that, either sort of formally as an agency or individual staff members involved in any of the sort of standing up the funds, monitoring, soliciting, tracking, dispersing, et cetera?
So I think our most direct involvement is on our COVID-19 rent relief fund, which we had the hearing on a couple weeks ago. I don't know if any of our colleagues want to speak to other activities that are going outside of the BPDA. You know, many of us are wearing multiple hats right now, but the program we have directly, which is a rent-a-firmament program for tenants of the BPDA that are their businesses are impacted by COVID-19. They're concerned about being able to make the rent, keep their employees employed. We're having active conversations with them, set up a needs-based application form for them to fill out exactly what their need is, sit down and have a conversation with us, and we're having those conversations with our tenants ongoing right now.
Thank you, Devin. I'm more curious in the sort of the city's general big relief funds. Is there anyone from the BPDA involved in those?
Councillor, I can give a bit of an answer. So for the last 10 weeks, I have been in charge of the city's food access efforts, and a significant portion of the Boston Resiliency Fund funds dispersed to this point have been focused on food and other personal item relief across the city. And so myself and a number of other individuals, including Mike Christopher, are very, very involved in dialogue with the Resiliency Fund when it comes to the food access issues, and making sure that we are working to do a number of different things, everything from provide supportive funding to the various organizations that form the backbone of food access efforts across the city. That includes things like Project Bread, the Boston Food Bank, et cetera. A significant amount of dollars to organizations that are directly impacting people on the ground. And then also working really, really hard to with nonprofits and small businesses to help put people back to work and feed people as well. So we are, just for the food piece of it, which is I think at least a third of the funding so far for the Resiliency Fund, the BPDA staff has been very, very involved. But I think I would defer any kind of larger questions about the BRF to Casey Brock-Wilson out of the mayor's office, who's been managing them on a day-to-day basis.
Okay, that's very helpful, John. And then in terms of your and the agency and the larger organizations' efforts on the food access front, what does that usually look like in terms of processes and decision making about who gets the funds and which organizations and what amounts?
So just to maybe put a finer point on it, we are really, really involved in standing up a number of different efforts across the city. And as you can imagine, I think when I testify to this council, I've done so a couple of different times on this issue. We've talked about everything from this past week, we've exceeded, I think, well over 1.2 million meals to Boston youth, but that's been done in partnership with a wide variety of organizations, including BPS, YMCA, BCYF, BHA, et cetera. So what we have done is provided feedback on a wide variety of organizations, but the BRF itself makes those selections. So we certainly have read proposals in the food space, and with an eye towards everything from ability to execute to MWBE participation to a whole host of other different issues. But again, specific questions around selection criteria and that process, I think, are best answered by the BRF team led by Casey.
Okay, thank you very much. And then my final, okay, I see, I'm scrolling through, I see the gavel. So my final bucket will be condensed into just one on land that the BPDA owns. So is it possible to get a list of, I know there's the transactions happening, and the council is often involved with various pieces of that and RFPs and this and that. But could we get the most updated list of parcels that the BPDA continues to retain ownership of?
Yeah, absolutely, Councillor. That's posted on our website. We'd be happy to share it with you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Wu. Next up is Councillor O'Malley and then Councillor Edwards. Councillor O'Malley.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and good afternoon, folks. Thank you for the great work that you're doing in these incredibly difficult times, and a special shout out, John, to you and your team for really doing some incredibly important and impressive work as it relates to food access during these incredibly challenging days. So I don't have too many questions. You've covered a lot. I would echo that we appreciate the sort of thorough overview. These were not part of the Ways and Means hearing process when I first joined this body, so this is certainly a step in the right direction. Obviously, all of us can always stand to improve, but it has not gone unnoticed that the BPDA is making an effort to be more transparent and open, and we're grateful for that. Jonathan or whomever, I was wondering if you talk a little bit about the Article 37 process and the steps that you're taking as it relates to resiliency guidelines. Shout out to John Delzell for really doing some incredibly important, really, really great work. But I know that the BPDA was slated to start a public process about sort of guidelines. So I want to talk about that, and specifically about net zero carbon construction guidelines for some of our sort of public-private partnerships in the disposition of some of our city land.
So I can actually start that, Councillor O'Malley. Thank you.
Thanks, Lauren.
So we will soon begin to analyze and update Article 37 and develop new zero net carbon zoning. We actually plan to have a consultant mobilized very shortly. We suspended the procurement process just as the pandemic set in. And this process will be a public process in which we'll assess existing policies and technical practices and develop recommendations in support of the ZNC zoning and related updates, of course, to existing Article 37. The work is then going to result in specific recommendations that will go into the zoning code through an extended public process off of that. So there will be a good amount of engagement. Keep your eyes up for that. It's just, it's a little bit tricky, again, with the pandemic setting in and our procurement processes. So it's still front of mind and on our budget as we move forward.
No, I really appreciate that, Lauren, and obviously it's music to my ears. I would ask if, we could stay in close contact, particularly as we roll out the public process. I've been working for nearly 4 years now, as has Councillor Wu and so many of our other colleagues, with the BCEC, the Boston Clean Energy Coalition, which has been really a leader and is just represents every neighborhood in the city of Boston, people passionate about this. And I think we would all agree that as we talk about rebuilding post-pandemic, it is even, more important now than ever that we address and have resiliency in our buildings, which, as you know, account for nearly more than 2/3, closer to
85%, I think.
Yeah, of our greenhouse gas emissions. So it's significant. We have to do it as a coastal city, and we also see how it's exacerbating respiratory illness in those who are suffering from COVID-19. So there's an environmental justice as well as public health going forward that drives me in this work, and I know many of you as well. And then can you talk briefly, sort of on the same wavelength, about using some city-owned land as a means to hit some of our resiliency goals? So I'm talking about looking at ways for more green space, both sort of gray top, green top, anti-flooding measures, more parks, more trees to be planted, just a way that we can use some of our real estate portfolio to address those resiliency and sustainability goals.
Absolutely, Councillor. So I can give a brief overview of that and happy to dig into it more with you offline. But that's something, as we look at land disposition goals on our for city-owned property, we're absolutely looking at opportunities to increase public open space, to practice what we preach when it comes to environmentally resilient building construction types. So I think we're doing everything from, hey, this is a small lot, infill could be a great community garden to help people have more access to outdoor open space, to in the marine park, looking at how when buildings are constructed, they can be less susceptible to coastal flooding 10, 15, 20, 50 years from now. Historically, we've also done several demonstration projects of net zero energy building typologies for residential construction, and would have to be eager to find opportunities to do that type of pilot-based work again in the future.
Councillor O'Malley.
Thank you, Devin. That's all for now. I'm having a little bit of technical difficulties, but I'll get the next round. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Great. Thanks so much, Councillor O'Malley. Next up, Councillor Edwards.
Thank you very much. I just want to start off by saying, one, I apologize for being late today, but when I think of the BPDAs and its immense power, I particularly think about its ability to impact massive developments in the future of Boston. In some cases, you're the only agency that can, because you're controlling how the zoning and the Article 80 process is going on private land. And so your vision, how your staff looks, how you prioritize, how you analyze, all of that is, well, it determines pretty much the future of Boston. And I'm not as comforted by that. I'm actually concerned by it because I feel consistently this agency has done everything it can to reject, push away from, and demanding taking an equitable analysis to the way it deals with things. The head of this agency, Brian Golden, has said that there's a culture of doing that, can point to nothing in writing, can point to nothing in memos or directives to the staff to take an equitable analysis. So I guess what I'll start with is first, what do you, in terms of your IAG analysis, your mitigation analysis, and how you plan, where and what emails or what FOIA am I going to have to request to figure out how you're taking an equitable analysis?
I can start with an equitable analysis to our real estate portfolio, and I'm happy to turn it over to some of my colleagues and talk to you about the development of privately owned land. So we've talked a little bit about this already on some of our practices around diversity and inclusion for prioritizing real estate dispositions. That was actually an executive order issued by the mayor about, I think, a little over a year ago now, like maybe a year and a half, saying whenever the city sells land, we want to prioritize diversity and inclusion as a selection criteria for who is going to be the developer of that land. And that's diversity and inclusion, not just in the ownership structure and the construction structure, but also who's going to operate it afterwards, who's going to be the tenant afterwards, and who is this going to serve. I think another place we can look to is how we spend our money. Michelle earlier spoke to our contracting procedures and how we're really vested in trying to advance minority and women-owned businesses in our contracting and in both in everything small scale. Michelle gave a great anecdote about we did a breakdown of
not to cut you off, Devin. So the records request for FOIA would go to your department specifically for the real estate disbursement. It would go to, I think, Michelle for the money and the contracts that have been given out to people of color. Where else? I just want to know who I'm going to be formally requesting this information from. Yeah. So I have real estate, I have Michelle's department or herself, And in private, who would it be? Dealing with private development.
So, Councillor,
I just want to be clear, I'm not asking you the question because I have certainly asked that question in many hearings and many working sessions about how you're going to do it. And we're going to do it culturally, or we're doing it culturally. So at this point, I'm asking, where do I get the information from? And that's it. So I have 2 answers from Devin. Where do I get it for private?
So, Councillor, I think the answer lies in a number of different places, and respectfully, I think the agency.
Just give me one.
The number one answer is that Imagine Boston 2030. Imagine Boston 2030 has.
That was exactly what I got from Golden, was to look to that plan. Actually, he told me to Google it. So, all right. The next question I have is specifically about how many times this agency or the city of Boston has been sued for language discrimination. I know of the one. Has this happened before?
So I am unaware of any lawsuit. We have an administrative complaint from HUD that we are working with. You're very aware of that. We've collaborated with. And I also, without getting into too much detail there, because that will be refereed in a different forum. I think this agency has worked really, really hard with the Suffolk Downs process.
I'm so sorry. I really, because my time is so limited, I really just, so you know of no lawsuit. You only know of the administrative action directed from the folks in East Boston to HUD to specifically, because of the fact that there was not language access at a meeting on Suffolk Downs. So beyond that.
So I disagree with that characterization.
Excuse me. Do you know how much that cost the city of Boston? Because we had to retain outside counsel to defend the city of Boston. Do you know how much that cost the city of Boston?
I am not privy to the legal bills for corporate counsel.
If you compared that number, maybe it would be good if we got that number to compare to how much it would cost to have full-time staff on the BPDA to avoid future, very likely lawsuits. And maybe, I don't know who crunches the numbers, you can get how much it would cost to assure that we have somebody on staff to assure language access in-house. I have had the experience in working with the BPDA, and one of the things it consistently does is pushes this burden onto developers, telling them to come back with the multilingual documents, telling them to do that. They are not the guardians or the vision creators for the city of Boston. You are. So asking them to do that is nice, but it shouldn't be considered part of mitigation. It shouldn't even be part of the process. It should be understood that it is in-house and that this agency's job to do it. So what would it cost? Or can you get that budget analysis?
So I'm happy to, if you'd like to have a more detailed conversation about this, we're happy to have it. I want to reiterate.
I don't want to have a more detailed conversation because I find too many of the detailed conversations result in still non-answers. That's what I find consistently. That's what you're hearing in my voice is complete and total frustration. We have detailed conversation. We don't lack that. We've had plenty of those. And yet I still find myself asking these same questions. So at this point, it's more like, where do I get the answer from? Who's got to sue who? How do we file for the records request? And just get in it. I'm not getting it from you.
Councilor, I've tried to answer the questions a number of times, and I've been interrupted every time. And respectfully, again, we have a citywide master plan that details how we go about things. We have very, very clearly demonstrated core values of the agency. You may find that inadequate, and that's fair.
Who on your staff monitors whether you keep to those values? Who?
So, Councillor, I think this agency has a track record of working really hard to.
The question is very simple. Who on your staff monitors whether you keep to those core values?
I think that's the responsibility of the leadership team at the BPDA.
At the end of the day, I believe it's the director. And he speaks to us about these issues often. We understand that they're difficult and challenging, and we're concerned about them too. And the director, every day in every interaction, leads by example with this.
So it would be his records that I need to FOIA or do a records request for. His conversations and his emails to you.
Yeah,
that's all I need, because I needed to know who's going to hold you accountable. And your director has told me it's a culture that he sets. It's nothing in writing. It is something that I can Google. That is what he's told me. That's how he's demonstrated his prioritization. He couldn't tell us a time where he told you guys about equity. He couldn't do anything.
Counselor, I don't think that's a fair characterization of Brian Golden's. I don't think that's a fair characterization of Brian Golden as a leader or of this administration and how we approach city building. And
Well,
respectfully,
I respectfully disagree with your characterization. And since I'm the one asking and having to deal with this and trying to make sure that we're pushing forward in this narrative, then I'm going to continue. I'm going to continue. And you know what? I wouldn't be surprised if I didn't think my boss didn't, if he was being attacked, that he didn't have, that didn't come to his defense and demonstrate that it wasn't a fair characterization. No offense, but thanks, but no thanks.
but that's patently unfair, and that's
No, it's patently truthful. It is truthful. He told me to Google American 2030. He told me that there was a culture of not bias. He told me these things, and when I asked you guys today, who is going to hold the agency accountable, you all said Brian. You were in the room when he said those things.
Councillor Edwards, the time has elapsed.
If it's elapsed, then it's moving on to the next councillor. But if Jonathan Greeley responds, I will respond.
No, we're moving on
Jonathan
to the
Greeley.
next, which is me.
If he responds, I'm going to respond. Dang it.
We're moving on to the next set of questions. Thanks so much. I'm now going to move to mine. I think these are important topics, but I think we have to keep a certain degree of decorum as we discuss them. My first question, Devin, is for you. It's about the real estate portfolio. You mentioned in the, I'm not sure if it's, I think it's in the Q3 update that there's a $200 million, I think you actually mentioned in your presentation today, that there's a $200 million sort of real estate liability ahead for the coming 10 years. And I'm just curious, in capital improvements that we're gonna have to make, I'm curious how much of that is just a regular schedule versus how much of that is deferred maintenance, and how much of that is stuff that you think that we are going to be able to sort of, improvements that we'll make and then receive in rent, sort of recompense to amortize them, versus which of them are things where we might be investing for the sake of the public, but there's still sort of costs on our side. So I think, because for example, I think you guys gave some examples of the work we've done in the China Trade Building, and the ability to create a library for Chinatown is huge, right? And that's a huge public value, but obviously it's not something where we can expect money to come back to us in rent that covers the cost of those improvements. So I just wonder if you could speak a little bit to that set of liabilities.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's a great question. Thank you very much. And I think it costs, I think Michelle in her opening remarks was clear that we're reliant on our real estate revenues to fund the BPDA. I think it's also important to realize that it costs a lot to manage a large portfolio of real estate. We do have a large capital needs assessment. I'd say a lot of it is just, as standard. There's maintenance work that needs to be done. A lot of it is capital improvements that are reaching the end of their useful life. We have it's both an opportunity and a threat that we own a lot of real estate along the water in Charlestown, downtown, and the Marine Park. Waterside infrastructure is expensive to maintain. It gets hit by waves all winter long. So we have piers and jetties and infrastructure work that we need to do. Plus, we need to prepare for climate change and sea level rise. So there's that work, which would certainly have public benefits when we invest in it, but also protects our investment in our real estate. And thank you for bringing up the China Trade Building. I think that's also a great opportunity to speak to the values that our agency has. I think we're really want to say, whenever we're looking at our real estate portfolio, we want to seek opportunities to be a great landlord, but also invest in community development. So I think at the China Trade Building itself, I just want to recognize as a sort of illustration of our real estate portfolio and who we do business with, who's actually the tenants there. It's a minority woman-owned hair salon, a small dentist, the Chinatown Main Streets office, the Chinatown Historical Society, the Gun Kwok dance troupe, which is, I think, New England's only all-female lion and dragon dance troupe, the Boston Public Library, which you mentioned. It's also, that's all the first floors. On the upper floors, there's Urban College, and the International Institute of New England, the Department of Children and Families, and we're going to welcome the health center soon too. So in terms of how do we use our real estate to advance what our values are as an institution, I think that's an example a great community investment right there. Do we make some rent off of some of those businesses? Yes, we do. We offer some of those businesses absolutely free rent, like the Chinatown Historical Society. Yes, we do. And I think it's an illustration of what we can do as a real estate owner.
So, but I guess the budget question that I have is just, so, I mean, I think about, I come from the Housing Authority previously, and there, we talk about, oh, we've got $1 billion of capital improvements that we've got no source for, right, that need to be made. And so that's the particular kind of thing to have hanging over your portfolio. And I guess what I'm trying to understand is when you look at the 200 million, is that something that kind of is reasonably supportable with the BPDA's budget, with your expectation, I mean, pausing for a moment on the question of the immediate budget impacts of COVID, and also, and also because obviously there is this small degree to which the BPDA capital budget, to which the city's involved in funding the BPDA capital budget. So I'm trying to understand how much of a
thank you, Councilor. I understand going the direct, and I'll turn it over to Michelle in a second. But I think there's largely we do need to fund our own capital. There are some capital improvements, infrastructure work that we get general obligation bond money from the city for roadway improvements in the Marine Park. But for things like China Trade, we need to fund our own budget. But turn it over to Michelle, who's our budget director, and knows this stuff inside out.
Sure. So we've been working a lot on trying to figure out how to present the data in a way that shows because there is a relationship between our operating revenue and our capital expenditures. So whenever you tend to look at the BPDA, you kind of need to put it all together to see that picture. The strategy around capital had been, first and foremost, thinking what are the revenue generating assets that are critical to the city of Boston. And clearly China Trade was kind of the cornerstone of that phase. And so we invested, upwards of $18 to $20 million, depending on what costs you want to capture, in establishing that building to spin off a bit of revenue. It'll take us about 10 years to recoup the investment itself, but we are able to see a bit more self-sufficiency from the BRA. What you've touched on is, well, now that we look at our capital needs, how the heck are we going to fund this? That's been an interesting question for us. I think that the Capital Reserve Fund was that first step for us to say, we have a variety of types of revenue. There's kind of that contractual, ongoing, it's locked in, we've got a 20-year lease. And so some of that is nice and scheduled. We've got volatility in parking, and we've got volatility in sale of real estate. There's always a bit of uncertainty around OWT. So some of those one-time items where somebody sat down 15 years ago and wrote a deal, and suddenly there's a renegotiation and we get proceeds from that upwards of $4, $5, $10 million even sometimes. Of course, we don't want that to just go into the general fund. We want to make sure that there's a clear mechanism that sets those funds aside. So we set up the Capital Reserve Fund, and essentially our plan going forward is we do try to find the right projects to partner with the city. Traditionally, the practice had been that the city would fund design on areas where there's a lot of synergy around getting this project done. In my time, I've seen us put in requests for projects that actually get funded in the Parks Department, but then we partner with them. And the city has provided new funding for transportation studies in the past few years, which has been incredibly impactful as we try to work with MassDOT and some of the others. So I hope that answers your question as far as what our strategy and thinking is. We're always looking for outside funding, and we feel that, even though we have this Capital Reserve Fund, that we always have to be very careful to make sure that this is going to take a long time and costs continue to go up, right? So the numbers that we're working with now are from 2018, I think, and we realize that after COVID, we might have to take a look at certain things like cost of steel, cost of good, fuel, and some of those things to try to figure out what our CPI is going to be going forward, because as you all know, it's very difficult to forecast right now. So thank you for the question.
Yes, thanks so much. And that's my time, so we'll go back up to the top. Councillor Braden?
Well, thank you. This is a very interesting conversation. Thank you all for your participation this afternoon. I was wondering about the possibility of uploading legal documents pertaining to projects such as affordable housing agreements and cooperation agreements. I feel that the community are interested in cooperation agreements and what the deal is, what did the developer commit to in a cooperation agreement. And I also feel that the community can help you folks in terms of policing that and monitoring compliance and asking those prickly questions about, okay, hang on, what happened with that? So is there any plan to put those sort of documents up online pertaining to projects?
So, Councillor, it's a great question. It's actually something we've been doing for the past year. So there are some back-end technical issues that are beyond my ability to effectively explain how we shifted a whole bunch of things. But the end result is that as of today, all cooperation agreements and affordable housing agreements for projects since 2016 that have been executed, right? So for project, you have to execute those agreements before a project can break ground. So all those agreements since 2016 that have been executed are now on the website in their associated project page. And we are currently working on 2014 and 2015. Those are anticipated to be done over the next month. So feel free to check out that online. If you have a specific project, if you notice something missing, let us know. This has been something that our digital team has been working on in earnest over the last 10 weeks to kind of expedite that process. So we've been using the time out of the office judiciously. So that is, it's a great question. And that quite honestly, that is an end result of lots of advocacy from community advocates across the city, but also a number of councillors in this forum.
Very good. In terms of the IAG process, I really feel that we need to revisit the Article 80 process and make sure that our IAGs are more diverse and more representative of the community. I know that we have so many of them out here. We have so much development that very often we end up with the usual suspects, a panel of the usual suspects. And sometimes there's 4 or 5 people, who are sitting on 4 or 5 IAGs all at the same time, which, I value their commitment. It's a huge commitment in terms of time, but it also blocks out seats for a more diverse representation in the community. Have you any plans to diversify IAGs?
It's something we spend a lot of time trying to do and try to solicit engagement in that front. Any ideas you have in your community of Alston Brighton to kind of bring new voices, new people to the fold, we'd love to hear them. We take our cues and IAG nominations from the council, from other state officials and state elected officials and ONS. And so I think one of the challenges I think we have when you sometimes have some of the same individuals overlapping. Sometimes overlap is good, right? Because there are maybe neighborhood-wide issues that familiarity with is helpful. But I think we strongly believe that we want IAGs to be fully representative of all stakeholders in and around an area. I think Councillor Mejia had a good question earlier about Main Streets groups and how do we involve local businesses. Those stakeholders can also, they don't have to be just residents. They can be people that live in the area, work in the area, own property in the area. So any ideas you have around how we can more fully incorporate new voices into the fold, we'd love to hear them because that's something we're very open to.
And also I'd like to ask you about the weight that's given to comment letters in the review process. Very often we have a handful, we have a number of residents who submit letters, and then we have a huge number of folks who submit letters in support of a project who don't even live in the city, never mind in the neighborhood. So we're wondering, is it just by numerical? Is there a numerical weight, just the sheer number of pros and for the project, against the project, or neutral, or are neighborhood comment letters weighted heavier than folks who don't even live in the city?
I think we certainly weight comments from city residents and neighborhood residents much higher. I would say one of the best parts about any letter that we receive are the issues highlighted in the letter. And so one of the things we try really, really hard to do is certainly for large projects that are scoped, the development team is forced to respond to all the issues surfaced in those letters. And so we try really, really hard to make sure that if issues are identified, not just in letters, but also in community conversations, formal and informal, we want to resolve them. And that's why IAGs and communities are so important. You can live in a neighborhood but not know how a stop sign might function in the morning because there's a school crossing area nearby, that kind of thing. So there is tremendous weight given to any comment received digitally, snail mail, in person, at a community, et cetera. And so I think we try to weigh all of those as part of the universe of understanding the neighborhood dynamic around a development proposal.
Very good. I'm going to keep going until somebody waves a spoon at me. Planning process, we really welcome, a planning process. We have the Western Ave planning process ongoing now, but sometimes we're left with a bad taste in our mouths when we have a very robust public planning process, like the Guest Street planning process that we had. And then the next big project that comes down the pike, literally down the pike, ignores the height recommendations, ignores the green space recommendations, ignores the density, and asks for zoning or relief right out of the box, like months or years, a year after a very robust planning process, and they get that zoning, they get that relief, and it seems like, what's the point in having a planning process if you're going to ignore it like right out of the box?
So I can probably start with that to talk a little bit about the planning process and then see if John can maybe add on to this. We do spend a lot of time on our planning processes. One of the problems that we often encounter, though, is that, when we start doing planning, speculation starts as well. And so in a way, by doing planning, the private property values tend to kind of already jump up. Another challenge we have is, it's always our goal to go right to zoning right after a planning process has been completed. We are not always successful in that. We're working to be better at that. But that's another challenge. And, there's oftentimes, the other issue too is they may get zoning relief. It's not always through the zoning commission. It's sometimes through the Board of Appeal, which, we can provide recommendations to, but it's a little bit different. I would just stress the importance of the process, going through the planning process, representing that, and that's what our planning staff does, when the project does come, and sticking to at least the guidelines that have been laid out to the greatest majority as possible. The challenge is, sometimes people will even get buy-in from the public for exceeding those guidelines, even though we had just, worked years on them, say. So it's a challenge. It's something we're aware of. It's something we're trying to refine. And it's very high on my list for the planning division to really get there.
Yeah, I really feel, this is my last compliment, I see what's going to made that way. I really feel that because we have such a liberal approach to granting variances, that it incentivizes speculation. So if we had a rule that says, okay, those are the rules, that owning, that's the recommendations, we're not going to have any exceptions, go away, then that level of speculative investment would damp down a little, I think. I
do want to raise one thing up, though, Councilor Braden.
Okay.
And the challenge here is, currently inclusionary zoning is not in the zoning code. We have an effort right now underway to get that accomplished. The only way we end up getting inclusionary zoning linkage payments is through when a project does need a variance. So there's that inherent challenge with the way our zoning code is kind of structured. And, we're working our best to try and, again, keep projects to what we envisioned during the planning process. Often that variance process is, the form of a planned development area, which again, will often, if the planning study is laid out, takes cues from that.
Okay, thank you. I have more questions, but I'll come back later. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Councillor Braden. Next up, Councillor Flynn, and then Councillor Flaherty. Councillor Flynn.
Thank you, Councillor Bach, and to BPDA and to Jonathan. Jonathan, what's the latest on, with COVID-19 obviously having an impact on the economy? What are you guys thinking about in terms of the Fort Point, South Boston waterfront on climate, as it relates to climate resiliency? What type of advice, guidance are you providing to developments in process or people that are looking to come to the area what type of advice are we giving them on climate resiliency issues as it relates to, especially with the economy not doing well?
So the advice we're giving is not changed, right? So climate change is very real, and it will absolutely have an impact on the city of Boston. I think we are a leader nationally in doing a lot of different planning on coastal resiliency. In Fort Point, we'll use the example of the extensive open space network that has been long planned for that area, and we have slowly seen manifested over time. A Street Park is a fantastic example of a recreational resource that also will be part of a gigantic open space sponge system in the event of tidal inundation in a storm event. We're also working really hard to to identify opportunities to provide barriers. So one of the things we're doing in Fort Point Channel is pursuing a berm system that would not only protect Fort Point, but also parts of South Boston, Chinatown, other neighborhoods. So the advice has not changed, that this is a very real issue. We're asking people to elevate, we're asking people to include open space, we're asking people to deal with stormwater recharge in the event of 90% of events are less than an inch. We want to make sure that people are able to handle that on their site and then release that back into the groundwater system. So I think we are trying really, really hard. You'll see this is a little bit outside your district, Councillor, but I think just as relevant is the Bayside development and the ensuing proposals for Moakley Field, right? So we look at that whole area in K Circle as a way to start thinking about, that's a great example of how private development, open space investment, transportation infrastructure can all hopefully be combined together to provide new opportunities for housing, research, et cetera, also educational resources, but also start to address the flood protection areas, because right there, right behind Moakley Park, we've got a number of BHA properties. And so that's how we're thinking about these things. And we are, it is one of the, I would say the most important thing we're dealing with from a risk perspective as the future, the economic future of the city.
And Jonathan, as it relates to the waterfront in Fort Point, the Boston Water and Sewer Commission and the Groundwater Commission as well, they're also playing a role in the planning process as well. Isn't that accurate?
Yes, the Water and Sewer Commission reviews every single project. They are quite thorough. The other thing that's really important to note is the Water and Sewer Commission also has a seat on the city's PIC. And so there is not a single piece of public infrastructure anywhere in the public right-of-way that can be built within the city of Boston does not have their stamp of approval. So they are a fantastic partner, and they are a rigorous partner. They put people through their paces. And so we're lucky to have such a strong advocate on behalf of the city's subsurface infrastructure that deals with stormwater, sewage, et cetera.
Yeah, those departments and issues are critical in the development process. We have old infrastructure, old pipes in Boston, but having the water and sewer, be heard and weigh in on development projects is critical, because the infrastructure we have is impacted by the ongoing development plans.
And I would just say, Councillor, on that point, just because it's worth noting, is that one of the things that often happens with any new redevelopment, the Water and Sewer Commission is, I would say, very aggressive in a positive way at identifying opportunities for subsurface investment that maintains, improves, helps for long-term planning of that subsurface infrastructure. So it's a great point to raise, and it's not just as important to look at the stuff above the surface, but below the surface too. So
right.
It's bringing up that important issue.
Yeah, even in the South End, when I'm talking to a lot of residents and a lot of neighborhood organizations, water and sewer issues are critical, especially along a lot of development is in the backyards where we have private alleyways, and figuring out what infrastructure is sound and what is private and not private also has an impact on the development process as well. And finally, Jonathan, I just wanted to mention I know you talked about the China World Trade building, which I love going to that building, plays a critical role in the neighborhood. But also the cooperation with D&D and with the neighborhood organizations on the permanent Chinatown Library and the housing right up there at the old Don Bosco High School is a real important project. It's a tremendous accomplishment for the city and for the neighborhood and for the neighbors that worked hard for trying to bring a library to Chinatown after 50-something years, as Councillor Block mentioned. But I also want to say thank you to Mayor Walsh, because he stood with the neighborhood for these years and made sure that Chinatown will have a beautiful new library, which they deserve. So I know you guys work with Sheila Dillon's office as well, and with other people, but I just wanted to pass that along.
You're saying that, Councillor, it's another example that we're really excited about for using our real estate to advance community development goals.
Thank you. Thank you. And Councilor Block, that's all I have. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Councillor Flynn. Next up, Councillor Flaherty, and then Councillor Asabi George. Councillor Flaherty? Actually, I think Councillor Flaherty may have had to drop off, so I think we're going to go straight to Councillor Asabi George. Councillor Asabi George? All right. Jumping for now to Councillor Mejia. Oh no, Councillor Asabi George, you there?
Sorry, I'm right here. I apologize. I am curious about, and I know that there's been a lot of conversation around the role of our city's growth and the sort of re-networking of our school system and the reconfiguration of some of our grades. So I'm curious as to the role that BPDA has played with build, it's under the auspices of Build BPS and some of the responding to the needs of our neighborhoods for schools as it relates to housing, sort of planning for population growth. I'm sorry, I've lost my train of thought running to get onto the back into the Zoom. So if anyone could just talk about the relationship of BPS as it relates to population growth and the reconfiguration of our schools and recognizing where there are some schools missing or there's a need for particular grades because of the population growth. My understanding is you all have that information.
Yeah, I can speak pretty generally on that, and then maybe John wants to jump in, it sounds like. But we do have coordination meetings with BPS on a fairly regular basis. Also, when we're running neighborhood planning initiatives, such as in East Boston or Mattapan or Charlestown right now, we partner with them to kind of look at potential sites. We also, our research department collaborates pretty heavily with them as well in terms of preparing those numbers.
I would just add, Councillor, I do think this is a great question to fully direct to BPS, and we'd be happy to be part of any of those conversations. We also tried really hard to be a resource to any city department, but have spent a significant amount of time with BPS over the past school year, helping them think about are there opportunities for them to be aggressive in the private market to look at different sites that might be a good fit for a school or as they move things around. So in particular, Rob Consalvo, a esteemed alumni of this council, has been somebody we spent a lot of time working with and look forward to continuing to be a resource. Lauren mentioned research, which is the other big piece of this, but I think we view ourselves as a really good partner to BPS in any way we can be.
All right, thank you. I'm just slow to the click as it happens. Thank you for that. I am all set with my questions today, Madam Chair.
Great, thank you, Councillor Asabi George. Councillor Mejia, and then it'll be President Cheney. Councillor Mejia?
Hi, yes. Just want to make sure that you can hear me.
We hear you great.
Okay, great. So I have questions for the Workforce Development Office, as well as I just have a quick question for BPDA. So for the workforce development, I'm just curious how many people in 2019 did the Boston Tax Help Coalition assist? I do see that there is a IRS stimulus check website in Spanish, but I'm curious to know if all of your services are offered in languages other than English. And can you provide some data on the audit literacy program hosted by the OWD? How many people does this organization assist every year? How does this organization measure success?
Thank you, Councillor, for those questions and for your interest for the Office of Workforce Development. So answers to a couple of your questions. So first, last year, the Boston Tax Help Coalition helped almost 11,000 households in the city of Boston, returning about $22 to $23 million back into the pockets of families through the earned income tax credits. We've also provided 3,600 free financial checkups to those families, and we found that about 50 to 60%, I have to double check the numbers, who received those financial checkups, which are light checkups, increased or build their credits anywhere between 7 to 15 percentage point, which is actually very good considering the cost savings for loan products. And in terms, and your second question was that what kind of what languages do we offer? The Boston Tax Help Coalition offered, I believe, 12 to 14 different languages through our volunteer assistance program. Not all of them are certified because they're volunteers, but we do provide language assistance as well as other physically challenged assistance and support to tax preparers as well. And then for the stimulus work that we have been doing, which we have been coupling that with the new Boston Tax Help Coalition, because we've had to move from bricks and mortars into online. So we knew that there was a need for folks to obtain their stimulus checks, because one of the criteria is that you had to file the previous year taxes to obtain your stimulus check for this year. And so we've launched the call center, I believe, May the 13th. We've had 10,100 calls, and we've been able to resolve right now, as of now, as we followed up 640 of those calls, meaning we've helped them obtain their stimulus checks. Because the stimulus work is a volunteer service, we were unfortunately only able to provide 2 language assistants. One is in Spanish and the other one is in Portuguese. We love to do more with the capacity that we have, with more capacity, but right now we only have 30 staff and volunteers to do the stimulus work. Clearly, we have a lot more to do in terms of language assistance, but it is on a voluntary basis, and because we need more people to staff the calls than to translate at this point, we are in a bind.
Okay, thank you for that. Thank you for that. And then my question for the BPDA is, one of the goals is to establish and maintain a culture of professionalism. What has led to this goal, and how do you intend to go about creating this culture? How is this culture going to be created? I'm just really curious about the ins and outs of that, and who helps define what that culture will look like, and what role will the community play in defining that mission and vision?
So I can take this in the sense that one of the planning division's goals specifically is to perform our regulatory kind of functions in a professional manner. And, you know, when I say professional manner on that especially, you know, we have a number of people spread out amongst the 5 different departments within planning: downtown and neighborhood planning, urban design, climate change and environmental planning, zoning and regulatory planning, and then transportation and infrastructure planning. And within there, you have a number of individuals that are really specialized, highly specialized. Many of them have, if not most, have master's degrees, and some of them are even registered or certified in their fields. And so that was the kind of professionalism that I'm getting at. But I think, you know, I can speak more broadly for the entire agency. You know, amongst the 230 people that we work with, everybody comes to work and is committed to serving the city in a really professional way. It's to, you know, creating better relationships with our communities. It's to doing our jobs better. It's to innovating. It's, you know, whether it be engagement or how we do planning studies. And I think it's constantly evolving. And, you know, we look forward to working with you.
Yeah,
if you have other ideas.
Yeah, I'm curious to know what, in terms of just kind of the process and how you go about defining what that looks like in terms of it, how culturally responsive is it? Are we looking at just soft skills? And I'm just really curious about that whole process. So if there's anything that our office can do to help inform that thinking, willing to provide some feedback. I know navigating City Hall is a challenge. I still get lost from the West Wing to the East Wing and just going from point A to point B. And so whatever role that we can play in helping you all just define that would.
Absolutely. And we would welcome you, Councillor, to work on that with us.
Thank you so much, Councillor Mejia. Next up, President Janey.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yep, can hear you great.
Wonderful. I just wanted to follow up on my questioning. And I think when we left off, we were talking about the criteria for planning throughout the city and how the Plan Dudley served as a model based on that Massport. And if I remember correctly, we were talking about the community engagement process. And I certainly respect that, criteria is going to look different in each community based on those unique needs of that community. But I think certain things are non-negotiable if they're embedded in our values as a city. And I would think equity and inclusion would be those types of values. And so for me, I would want to see if we think that's important and 25% of the project's ownership, has diverse ownership. If that's a value that we believe in, then I think that should be in writing, etched in all across the city. I would like someone to respond to that piece. Now, I understand green space or density and parking and other things. The community may decide that they want to put different weights on certain things. But I think that there has to be some sort of uniform approach, particularly if we're talking about equity and inclusion. And if we're talking about it in a way that we really value it, then we've got to do more to show that. Can someone respond?
I'm happy to take that question, Councillor. Thank you for raising that, and I certainly agree with you. I think you're right to ask that. I think maybe to respond completely affirmatively, diversity and inclusion is absolutely a priority in every one of our RFPs. Is a commonplace across all of our dispositions of city.
What is the weight then for equity and inclusion?
Yeah, I understand that's the crux of your question. I think what is not spelled out explicitly in our real estate RFPs is the weight of any particular selection criteria. When we said 25, 25, 25, it's because there's usually 4 selection criteria, and so 4 roughly equal. It is possible to have selection criteria that are specifically weighted. That's not our current template. One thing we often do, and I know you participate in these, are have community-oriented project review committees review all the responses to a development proposal and sort of collectively weigh everything from the ability to get it done to the diversity inclusion to the density. And I think you're raising an important point about what is the weighting, how is that carried across all?
Absolutely. And so for me, I want to be real clear. I think I agree community engagement should drive much of the process in terms of the design, and we want to hear the voices of the residents across our city, and they're going to lead from their neighborhood perspective. I get that, but there are certain things, if we say we value them within the city, we can't just leave that to a review process. We have to say, if we value this, this is going to be a non-negotiable. And that's what I'm looking to hear, and I'm not quite hearing that.
Yeah, it's because what we haven't established is a firm weighting.
So when might we do that? Can you offer some timeline for what the thinking is or the plans are for doing just that? And then my other question is just around conduizing ground floor space. This comes up repeatedly. I'd like to see more opportunity to support small business owners and their ability to stay in their neighborhoods, whether we're talking about a rent-to-own program, whether we're talking about, some sort of mortgage that they get, or whether they just buy it outright. I would like to see us moving in a direction, whether D&D projects or BPDA projects, that the ground floor space, that we, offer that as part of our package, that we offer opportunities for conduizing and for small business owners to own. But I really want to pin down this equity and inclusion piece. So what is the timeline? When are we going to get to a place where this really is part of the uniform thinking across the board, understanding that things may change in terms of other criteria based on neighborhood need.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I'm very happy to work with you on that. And I think maybe the way to establish it is that the weighting shall not be less than, but could be more than 25%.
Exactly. It could work that way. Exactly. But I think what I'm really looking for is for it to be codified as part of our process. Yeah. Even if it does offer that type of flexibility, we can determine what the right percentages are and what that right range is. But I think there are some things that we want to see. We want to see good green building. That's going to be non-negotiable. It doesn't, whether, neighbors agree or don't agree, certain things have to be non-negotiable. I think equity inclusion is one of those things. And I think the more that we do our planning in a way that captures these values in writing, the better our planning process will be, the more clear it will be, the more transparent it will be, and the more equitable our results will be, and the more green our results will be.
Thank you again for raising it. That's a great point. I'm really excited to work with you on it. I think we should absolutely implement that. I don't have the firm answer because I think we need to work through it, but it's directionally exactly where we want to go. And to your question about condos, that's also really a great point around not just, I think we spend a lot of time thinking about home ownership opportunities, but we should also be thinking about business ownership opportunities. And during part of the Plan Nubian Square process, we heard that loud and clear from community members. And in the Blair Lot redevelopment specifically, that was a firm requirement. We said this must be, all proposals for this at this property must be ownership opportunities for both the residential component and the commercial component.
Exactly. That's really important. I am happy to see that. I know we're running short on time. I appreciate the work that folks are doing. I do want to follow up on these equity and inclusion questions with some firm, concrete, this is how we're going to move forward to solve these issues. I don't want to keep coming back budget season after budget season or hearing after hearing, having the same conversation. So happy to work and follow up with whomever on the team on those issues. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you so much, Madam President. Next up is Councillor Edwards. Councillor Edwards, you have the floor. I would just ask, I know that we were in a somewhat heated exchange related to the director at the end of the last round, and I would just ask that we take this in a different direction. Councillor Edwards.
Thank you very much. So I am curious about so we specifically talked about the lawsuit, and I'm going to call it a lawsuit. There was a lawyer retained. They filed a complaint with HUD. The city retained a lawyer to defend itself. In this suit, the city has retained outside counsel. The BPDA doesn't know how much it costs. Is that because the BPDA isn't paying for it? Paying for the outside counsel?
I'm just not. Lauren, are you more familiar with it?
No, I'm not. I was just gonna, note that this is an ongoing matter right now before HUD, and it's not really appropriate to ask anybody here today to speak formally on the details because, to be quite truthful, we're not in the weeds on this, and we certainly can't talk about ongoing processes.
We do also sometimes obtain our own outside counsel, so it is possible that if there are expenses incurred, that it does eventually come back to us. I'm just not sure about that at this time. I'd be happy to follow up with you if and when at the conclusion of that investigation.
Yeah, because my biggest concern is that it's the BPDA's process, it's their monitoring, it's their leadership, and as a result, we got sued, the city of Boston, but it's our tax dollars getting this outside counsel to defend the BPDA. So I really want to make sure that we're not stuck paying the bill for the BPDA's mishandling and exclusion of folks who do not speak English. So that's one thing. And so I would love ultimately to know not the details, not what the BPDA is doing, but who is paying for the outside counsel. I'm also curious in terms of following up with some of the questions from Councillor Janey. While there seems to be no written formal requirements, guidelines, anything really towards looking at equity, though there seems to be a commitment to maybe one day have them. I'm curious how many records you keep on all the mitigation you've given out. And by that, I'm curious, when you give out the record, the mitigation, do you give out by, do you keep records for the organization, the demographics of the individuals, how much is given on a regular basis? Could you do an equity analysis of the money that you've helped monitor go back into the communities? Do you have those records to do that?
Councillor, we have extensive records on all mitigation that we have received or been a pass-through for. I would have to go to that department and get you answers on the level of detail for each individual. It's, as you can imagine, the types of mitigation are wide in a variety of types. And so, we can easily get you an answer on exactly what level of detail analysis that can be gone through. But we have extensive records. That's been a priority of this administration.
The finance department works cross-functionally with all the various entities in the organization to make sure that we are moving that money out. I think some of the biggest challenges is around timing and knowing when those things come. Sometimes they come so late that the original intended use has expired or is no longer existing. And so, there's a group that comes together, and I can certainly see what reporting we can pull together for you on that.
Yeah, I would be particularly, I want in terms of breakdown of demographics of the individuals, if there was no longer the required, or the use is no longer applicable, what other use did it go to? Exactly. I think it's very important because who can drive where the mitigation goes drives a lot of money. And already we know that their equity analysis doesn't happen, but if you have these records, it would make sense maybe to go back and look at them. Speaking of money, so one of the BPDA's employees obviously was caught up in a corruption scandal. He ultimately has, been found guilty of that. And I'm curious how your budget reflects either training or anti-corruption safeguards to go forward. How your budget specifically reflects that. Not if there's been conversation, not if there's been a culture, a dollar sign, or how you're going to protect the funding.
So I think that work lives inside our human resources department. They administer all of the required trainings, both upon hiring as well as the intermittent required updates, because I know that there's a variety of trainings that every few years you have to redo. So they are in charge and administer that. I think from there, that was an unfortunate situation of individual.
Have a number in an increase or decrease in the training and specific trainings that were put forward for corruption?
Councillor, no, there was an agency-wide additional ethics training provided for all staff as a requirement of employment, in addition to the regular state ethics training that employees have to do, I think, on a biannual basis.
Additional funds set aside or any attempt to set aside for an independent person or presence or audit?
Audit of what?
This time.
Records of funds, of employee actions, I'm not sure. Just making sure that you're paying so that we don't pay.
I'm not sure I understand the question. Respectfully, Councillor.
Okay. Beyond your regular HR, and this, it sounds like there was one additional training in ethics. Is there been funds allocated to an internal audit at all at the BPDA?
An internal audit of what, Councillor?
Your funds, your employee actions, your negotiations for mitigation, anything that would be subject to corruption.
So Michelle might be able to speak to this a little bit better, or we can certainly ask our CFO, but from an accounting perspective, we have an annual audit that it is something we pay for to happen. And the objective of that audit, among other things, is to identify potentials for waste, fraud, and abuse. We'd be happy to dive in with that more with you. To your question around training budgets, that is something that we have increased over the past year. and made very clearly available to staff. And I think this is broader than the ethics question that that's originally driving this, but I just want to take this opportunity to say that is something we investing in our staff's professional development and their competency and their ability to do their jobs under the law is something we care a lot about. In my practice, that what's really important is that staff on our team really understand procurement law, construction law, and so we've spent the time and money to send all of our staff members who are involved in those areas of our business to the appropriate state law trainings in order to give them that expertise, or even if they already had it, we said you should probably go again because we want to make sure that you're on top of those skills.
Just to be clear, there's an annual audit and there's trainings that go on. I'm assuming that annual audit and the trainings were happening even when even when he committed, the BPDA employee committed that crime.
So, Councillor, just to put a finer point on it, as a result of that unfortunate incident, the agency went through an extensive agency-wide training provided by the state for every single employee, on top of regular required trainings, biannual ethics certifications that happen for all municipal employees.
Do I still have time?
No, I'm afraid it's elapsed, Councillor Edwards. Thank you. All right, I'm going next, and then I'll do third rounds just from folks who want them, so if people can just put a blue hand up if you've got a third round of questions, that'd be great. Michelle, I think I have a few quick follow-up questions about the FY20 third quarter report. Just wondering if you could speak quickly to why, so like rental leases were down, and, at first I thought COVID, but it's a little early for it to be COVID. And then I think both sale of real estate and equity participation are up. Yes. And just wondering if you could speak a little bit about that on the revenue side.
Sure. So the rental and leases category also carries parking. And so this is a space where we saw an immediate impact even in the third quarter. And we expect that impact to carry. We also, sometimes run into timing where folks will pay quarterly, and so there'll be like a payment at the end of that year. We've been working really hard to get seasonality really ironed out so that when we start to chop the quarters, we don't have as much of that variance. In our sale of real estate category, I had mentioned before that that's a space where we sometimes have some unexpected transactions and some unexpected revenue. So there were a couple organizations that sat down to take a look at their lease and decided to do a rewrite, which resulted in proceeds for us beyond what we had expected. We've also been in a space, if you were to go back in some of the older budgets, we've been trying to be a little bit more mindful about these one-time items and what they exist over a long period of time. When is it actually appropriate for us to include anticipated expenses? Anticipated revenue. So one of those examples would be the South Station air rates deal. That was kind of on the radar for a while. We weren't sure when it was going to close, but in preparation for FY20, we felt confident that it was going to close, and so we included it in our budget. And then, we schedule for the next cycle. Does that answer your question directly as far as the fluctuation?
Yeah, I think somewhat. I guess on the expenses side, I'm curious about the property management.
Sure. So there's some interesting activity going on there as we've, again, kind of built out our budget awareness and our practice. What's been happening at the same time is gas fee rules have been changing, which impacts the BPDA, the BRA, and ANC a little bit differently than it does the city. So this is where we start to get into the really wonky differences. But what we're finding is that some of our projects are not eligible to be funded through our capital budget, and we actually have to pay for them for operating expenses. So in property management this year, we included 2 large projects for the Charlestown Navy Yard, filling in the culvert and sinkhole, as well as the demolition and environmental remediation for Building 108. Those 2 projects don't increase the value of our assets. They're not anything that would depreciate over time. So it's essentially a really expensive maintenance project. And so we're getting into a space where sometimes we have to budget for these large items. A project like Building 108 takes years to get ready to go. We were hopeful we would get it out to bid, and we were super close. We got it out to bid right as the shutdown happened. And so we're pushing those expenses forward. They'll be included in next year's budget. And so in general, those are kind of leading to the very large fluctuation that we see this year.
I see. Okay. All right. And then I had, moving off of the immediate Q3 questions, I guess, can you talk a little bit more about what the exposure looks like in the year ahead? I mean, I think when Devin, and this might be a question for you, Devin, I don't know. I mean, when you came to the other hearing we had, I think you were saying that lease income is about 75% of, I might be wrong, but something in that neck of the woods in terms of the BPDA's overall revenue.
And, it's still early days, to be totally honest, because there are disruption. There are tenants who are not paying their rent. And some of those tenants we're working with to negotiate a new agreement due to COVID-19. And there's some that just can't get into the office to get the mail out to pay the rent, which is a totally different issue. And I think those are quickly now resolving as time goes on. So it's hard to say precisely what the future holds there. I think maybe one way that Michelle and I did a lot of thinking on this, and feel free to jump in, Michelle, one thing we looked at is our exposure by industry. So the hotel ground leases that we have, the tourism leases we have pull a significant amount of revenue out of parking, and there's a chunk of that comes from cruise ship parking. We could be pretty confident that those are going to be severely impacted. The long-term ground leases for commercial development, they're probably fine. The retail oriented businesses, we really need to help them out and forego that rent. So I think it's 70-75% of normal might be a good estimate. It could be worse than that. Maybe it could be a little bit better, but it's still mostly a forecast at this point.
Okay, thanks so much. And then can I ask a question? And this might be for Lauren, this might be for you, I'm not sure. It was in the questions that I submitted. You mentioned earlier how long it sometimes takes us to get planning studies into zoning. And it's definitely been a frustration of mine. I think you and I first met in a project related to the Stewart Street corridor, where we had a planning study that took a very long time. In fact, I'm not sure if it ever got into zoning.
It was.
It was? Okay.
It was.
But it
2016, yeah.
But it hadn't at the time that we were, working through quite a large PDA in the area, despite the guidelines already existing. And so because of that, I'm interested in what's going on with the sort of coastal floodplain overlay and what the timeline on getting that into zoning is going to be.
Yeah, so, there was a lengthy process for that, and we took them to our board. I want to say it was last fall. Right now, we actually have been working, we've hired someone to help us write the zoning text, and that's in draft form. We were getting ready to actually go out and restart the public process in advance of, bringing that eventually to the zoning commission when COVID became an issue. So again, front of mind when we can figure out how to have public processes virtually, obviously, for the next couple of months, if not longer. We'll be completely moving forward with that and pursuing it.
Great, thanks so much. That is all my time, so I'm going to go back up to the top. Councillor Braden.
Here we go. Hi, I'm back. Okay, I've still got loads. The inclusionary development policy with the 3 tiers of 3 levels hasn't really worked well for Alston Brighton, because all of our inclusionary development units are pegged at 70% of our area median income, and that's really out of kilter with the median income in the neighborhood and in the city in general. So is there any plan? Like I know Tim was looking at revising that in policy. Where are we at with revising our inclusionary development policy? Anybody got that?
So I will do my best. The city has, there's been a working group looking at that issue for a little while now. And I think that one of the things I would just reiterate on the 70% of AMI, 70% of AMI is a maximum. So that means there are units that can be lower than that. And I think we've worked really hard.
Not too many. Sorry.
Well, I think that's fair. I think what we've tried to do is try to find a way to kind of look at that policy and find ways to kind of provide opportunities for income levels that are capped below 70% or lower. So I think we're looking at that. So that's a live conversation. Some of those other issues include the one Lauren raised earlier too about trying to make sure that IDP can get into zoning as well, so that we are not, it is not just something related to projects that require variances. And so I think maybe that conversation is one that would be best handled in not a different forum, but a much more deeper dive with folks. We have staff that focuses entirely affordable housing. Tim Davis is actually right before this current public health crisis. Tim did make the switch to D&D in a policy role, but he is still very involved with the agency. Quite honestly, D&D and BPDA are hand in glove on this issue in looking at that. So we'd be happy to provide a deeper dialogue with some of our policy people who are working through the issue live. But I think there are probably some areas for improvement there in trying to find a way to optimize the program so that it is able to provide as many benefits for as many people as possible in the city.
Yeah, and hopefully we can get that soon. I'd really emphasize how excited we would be if we had a project cheat sheet that every developer completed. It was a consistent, because the folks who are reviewing the projects are leafing through hundreds of pages trying to find data like FARs and the number of one bedrooms, the number of, how many IDP units, and it takes hours to find that information. It's not user friendly for those folks in the community who are trying to monitor projects.
Councillor, just to quickly say, we love that idea, and I mean that sincerely. And so it's something I think we'll try to find a way to get right on.
Yeah. The Water and Sewer Commission is an independent body, separate from the city, but my concern is we're seeing a huge amount of development, but we're also facing sea level rise, and there are sewage treatment works out in the harbour have to be vulnerable. And I'm just wondering if that issue is being thought about and configured into mitigation from developers to help support that essential infrastructure.
Go ahead, Devin.
So I don't have a precise answer for that. I do think that we should ask the Water and Sewer Commission. It's a great question, but it is something that we have been working with the Water Sewer Commission on property that we actually own in terms of how can we make water and sewer infrastructure systems more climate resilient, floodgates, et cetera. So it's a topic that we should probably bring together with a larger group of experts.
Very good. And the other issue, one more, is that we have a huge amount of institutional expansion in Ulster and Brighton, especially in relation to Harvard. And the Harvard Alston Task Force has been stood up now they were here 20 years ago. Many of them have served on the task force for 20 years. It's very underpopulated right now and needs some injection of new energy and new people and just a lot of recognition of the great work that they're doing. It's something that, community participation and the community process is sort of vital to getting really good projects out of the box and getting them up and ready to go. Is there any plans within the BPDA to cultivate such task forces and put some resources into supporting mentoring new people and putting some resources into providing basic human needs like food and stuff like that?
Councillor, the short answer is yes. We agree that the Harvard Task Force is a little bit light at the moment. The task force hasn't had much to consider, quite frankly, in the last couple of years. And so I think it's been a bit of a slower period for the group. We actually just had an internal meeting on this topic and a briefing for Director Golden last week. As you can imagine, it's an area of particular interest to be represented as a fellow elected official. He did represent that area for a long time. And I think this is one of the main issues we raised up to, is that we think we do have to work to expand membership on the task force, and also think about the role of the task force vis-a-vis some of the private development on Harvard-owned land, the Enterprise Research Campus, et cetera. So I think you should expect us to be reaching out directly to your office and other elected officials in Olson Brighton to kind of talk through that. And I think we view that as a partnership. We'd love to have your ideas. You did ask this question earlier, and I think it's been one that's been touched on by a number of other councillors, is how do we find a way to expand? So short answer is yes. Longer answer is we can't wait to get into it with you.
And then the other issue is I-90 realignment and the whole issue around, it's like next big thing. I'm running out of time. You and I have talked about this. It's really important when we have planning studies that the people from transportation are at the table. I really to be, and it's absolutely essential in Ulster and Brighton to have somebody from transportation at the table in these discussions.
And they are.
That's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Braden. If Councillors Flynn, Asabi, George, Mejia, or Edwards, if any of you who have a third round question could just raise your blue hands so I know. Or just raise your real hands. Okay. Great. I have a couple more. I guess the main one, and I alluded to it again in my questions, but it came up at the landmarks hearing. I think, Lauren, you or someone, or maybe it was Michelle in her opening presentation, said that, historic preservation was front and center. I have a concern that we don't have the kind of expertise in historic preservation necessarily on staff at the BPDA, and that in other cities, the historic preservation piece would, like the expertise that sits at landmarks would be more fully integrated into our planning side. And I'm worried about that. So I would love to hear what kind of concrete resources you feel like the team has on that front.
Yeah, I mean, I would just say that within urban design, within that department, within the planning division, there are a number of individuals that are trained in historic preservation. A number of them, in fact, came from the Landmarks Commission and now work with us and have been there for a long time. It's front of our mind, especially with, a plan like Plan Downtown, which I know you were kind of looking for some more info on. Plan Downtown is all about preserving what is really special about downtown, but also finding places that we can grow. The one thing I would just say is, while we have people that are trained in preservation and it's front of our mind, we do work very closely with the Landmarks Commission staff, and we have regular coordination meetings with them. I think that this kind of question that you're trying to get at might be better handled if we were to have a conversation with the Environment Department together. Because, I don't necessarily see it as it's something that we're kind of lacking, especially with Plan Downtown. We're doing our best to try and, kind of elevate the inventory there because we know that it's outdated and it's actually a really critical part of moving forward.
Yeah, no, I think the challenge is that the places in the process where the Landmarks Commission formally comes in are all at the end, right? I mean, there are things like demolition.
They've been with us since the beginning.
Yeah, but
on the planning process, yeah.
Sure, no, and that's definitely true. On the Plan Downtown, I see that, and I think there's a lot of opportunity there. I think that in general in our system. So yeah, I'd love to be part of that conversation about how we integrate it better, especially because there's a difference between preservation planning and thinking about how you preserve the nature of a neighborhood versus dealing with, hey, this building that might come down has some part of it, should we preserve it? I think once you're having the conversation at that piecemeal way, as with so many things, right? It's the same way you want to plan for affordability. It's the same way you want, it's just like moving it upstream is really what we need. So
yeah, I really do think the answer is more collaboration. So.
And I'm not sure if this is you or John or someone, but I also asked a question just about, Plan Downtown does seem like, at least in theory, a move towards maybe having mitigation that's tied to density bonuses and is sort of built in without us needing a variance to hang it on. I don't know if someone can speak to that, the prospects of that coming through and the prospects of that being a model for us elsewhere to rationalize planning in the city.
So again, I'm going to return to the fact we don't have inclusionary zoning in the zoning code, right? So right now, absent that, the way to move these sort of things forward and be able to get linkage and IDP units is to plan development areas. However, with a robust planning process like Plan Downtown, coming up with a framework that is very strict about what can go into the plan development areas, similar to what we did with the Stork Route planning study. I feel confident that at least within that framework we can be okay, but I'm also, completely hoping, crossing fingers, that we can, process, move the IDP process where it's actually into the zoning code forward, so that we can move away from that. And we'll continue to work with you, of course.
Great. Okay, I think those are all of mine. I just want to check, I've got a couple of people in the waiting room for public testimony potentially. So if Sarah or Tony, if you're here to testify, if you can either put up your blue hand or put something in the chat and let me know. Okay, Sarah is. So now I'm gonna move you over. Now gonna recognize, I'll recognize Sarah McCammond. Sarah, if you could just identify yourself, your residence or who you represent, and then just speak for a couple of minutes, that'd be great.
Thank you, Councillor Bach, for the opportunity to give comment. My name is Sarah McCammond. I'm with the Harborfront Neighborhood Alliance, and my remarks primarily focus on the future of community engagement and the BPDA public meetings in this new normal. In this hearing, we heard that there will be a rollout of soft engagement planning. And this month, we also saw that the BPDA board meeting included a virtual public component. We've seen BCEC subcommittees hold a virtual meeting, and ZBA also going virtual. And just wanted to recognize the importance that public notification about these virtual meetings and the communication of policy and procedural changes need to be made well in advance so the public isn't caught off guard by the re-engagement of public meetings after a no BPDA hosted public meeting policy, the long absence of meetings, and the advent of summer. Given that the pandemic is changing the way we interact, I'm very interested in understanding more how virtual engagement will be informative, transparent, equitable, accessible, and solicit feedback in a way that's meaningful. How the BPDA is going to address residents without devices and connectivity, train people on those devices and new technologies, language access, and broadening the avenues of communication to make people more aware of opportunities for engagement. And finally, what resources is the BPDA looking to put toward a new normal public engagement process? Is there in-house talent running like virtual public engagement with a combination of smaller group meetings in person? Is this going to be something that, as I said, in-house or consultants assisting? Is more funding being required? And if so, we would very much encourage if there could be a reallocation of funds toward this important process. With the interagency working group on public engagement and public meetings, it appears there could be an opportunity where representation by neighborhood associations and or civic groups in that working group would be beneficial in assisting the formulation of an accessible, equitable and interactive meeting format, and we'd be happy to offer assistance in that endeavor. And then just very quickly, also encouraged to hear that about a community-driven planning approach utilizing BPDA-owned real estate. Like to learn more about BPDA-owned properties and the best way and person to contact to initiate those community-driven programs. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you so much for those comments. I think that's it from the public. So I just want to thank the BPDA team again for coming on today, all the councilors for participating, and also just note for the public who's watching at home that at 6 o'clock we're going to have a public testimony dedicated hearing. So we'd love to have you. It's the time. We'd love to have you join us and give testimony for that. Yeah, thank you so much. Thanks, Michelle Goldberg and the whole team.
Thank you.
And with that,
Thanks,
This
thanks,
meeting-
Councillor.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank
You
you.
have to- Thank you all.
Thank
The
you.
meeting of the Ways and Means Committee is now adjourned. Thanks.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you very
Thank
much.
you all.